It was about 4 years after the event known as the QB incident in the history books of Konoha. On that fateful night, a shinobi who had earned great renown in the last Great War had given his life to protect the village he served as Kage. He had hoped his sacrifice would not only save his village, but also safeguard his budding family. Yet, in the end, the only life he could preserve besides the village itself was that of his newborn son. To accomplish even that much, both he and his beautiful wife had to make the ultimate sacrifice to contain the calamity of the nine-tailed fox. The Yondaime Hokage had hoped his son would be celebrated as a hero, nurtured to become the new guardian of Konoha. But while his predecessor had tried to ensure a just future for the boy, the hidden struggles for power and influence within the village would not allow it. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the third Hokage, once retired and now reinstated, sat in yet another council meeting on the anniversary of the incident, feeling the weight of his years. He longed to be with little Naruto on his birthday, to check in on him at the orphanage, as he did each week. However, as Hokage, he could only officially visit once a month, lest his actions raise suspicion. He had hoped the boy would not end up in an orphanage, but with the clans and even civilians vying for influence, he had to choose his battles carefully to maintain peace. At the very least, he had ensured that Naruto was placed in an orphanage where a friend of his late wife served as matron. Thanks to this arrangement, the boy received care, and few even knew his true identity, just as Sarutobi had intended. He had assigned an ANBU guard he trusted to watch over Naruto, but with forces stretched thin, there were moments when this protection was absent. Like tonight, as Sarutobi sat in the council chambers. Konoha Orphanage. Unaware of the old man's concerns, a blonde-haired boy sat curled up in his reading nook, engrossed in a children's book about the origins of chakra. He liked the large, bold letters, and the matron had taught all the children to read and write their kanji once they turned 3, some even earlier. Those who could read often used the orphanage's small library to prepare for the academy. Outside, there was even a playground, though Naruto had to be coaxed into using it. He preferred learning new things. Only the old man Hokage, or Uncle Toby, truly understood his curiosity. Before settling in with his book, he had received his birthday cake from the matron and shared it with the other children, earning cheers and smiles. It had been a good day. Rain poured outside, keeping everyone indoors. Some played in the common room, while others remained in their dorms. It was early evening when Naruto heard raised voices down the hall. Like the hero in one of his comics, he moved stealthily, his sock-clad feet silent on the wooden floor, until he reached the staircase. Peering down, he froze. "You will hand over that boy, or you die," one of the men snarled at the matron. Naruto's stomach clenched as he spotted his own picture, taken during last year's fundraiser event, held in the thug's grasp. These men looked rough, dangerous. His hands instinctively flew over his mouth to stifle a gasp. He wanted to scream for the matron to run, to hide, but his body refused to move. The threat escalated. One man lunged, blade flashing. The matron dodged with an elegance betraying her years, pulling a metal hairpin from her tightly bound hair. The thin needle found its mark, sinking deep into the attacker's throat. Blood oozed from the wound, replacing his intended war cry with a gurgle. His comrade looked from his dying partner to the matron, fury twisting his features. "You'll pay for that, you old hag." Naruto's wide eyes stayed locked on the pooling blood. His face lost all color, but the matron's firm voice snapped him back to reality. "We'll see about that," she said, pulling a second hairpin free. Her white hair cascaded down as she readied herself, steel meeting steel as the fight resumed. In Naruto's seal, a presence stirred in the darkness. Deep within the boy's subconscious, the chakra construct sealed within him stirred for the first time. But before the nine-tailed fox could release even a sliver of its demonic energy to influence the boy, it was stopped. Kurama, the ancient fox demon, found himself facing something he did not expect. A mirror image of himself stood just beyond the bars of the cage, yet it was no perfect reflection. The fur was slightly different, richer, the tips of its tails black. This version radiated a presence far stronger than his own. "Who are you?" Kurama growled, baring his canines. "Why have you stolen my form?" The other Kurama regarded him with indifference. "I have stolen nothing. How can I steal what is already mine? We share this form. We share existence." The caged fox narrowed his eyes. "TCH, you expect me to believe that? Believe what you will. I am you from another world, my vessel, and I achieved a state that allowed us to transcend between planes. While my version of your warden remains preoccupied with the Shinigami's affairs, I managed to slip through to aid you." A laugh rumbled from the caged Kurama. "I knew I was great, but this good? So, you're here to free me from this seal." The other shook his head. "No, I'm here to guide you, to show you a better path. Work with your Jinchuriki, not against him. The powers that be are displeased with your past actions. It will be far more difficult to achieve what we have done, but I can help." Skepticism flickered across the imprisoned Kurama's face. "And what, exactly, do you expect me to do?" "Take the boy away from Konoha. The village will not protect him. It will only break him. There is a temple on the outskirts, the Uzumaki Mask Temple. Take him there. Train him. Prepare him for what is coming." The caged Kurama huffed, contemplating the plan. "So, let me get this straight. You want me to exploit the seal's backdoor, snatch the brat, fake his death, and train him so he can save the world? Sounds like something an idiot would come up with." The other Kurama merely nodded. "Perhaps, but it is the best option." A heavy silence settled between them. Then, the caged fox exhaled sharply. "Fine, I'd be a fool not to follow my own advice." Back with the fighting. Naruto wondered where the other children were as he observed the matron locked in a desperate one-on-one battle with the last remaining thug. It took him a moment to recall that the orphanage had protective seals. If he hadn't been outside his dorm before the chaos started, he would likely have been trapped inside, just like the others. Those seals had been the reason Naruto excelled in his calligraphy lessons. Though they weren't officially graded, the matron always praised his dedication. The same matron whom Naruto now saw beginning to falter. At the start of the fight, she had controlled the flow, but the tide had shifted. The thug was pressing her back, her movements slowing, her face damp with sweat from exertion. Something beyond his understanding guided Naruto's steps as he silently descended the staircase behind them. His feet made no sound as he approached the corpse of the fallen attacker. A compulsion pulled at him, and he reached for the hairpin still embedded in the man's throat. His normally bright blue eyes shimmered with a red tint, his pupils slitting like a predator's. Without a word, he moved forward, his grip tightening around the bloodied pin. "Why are you trying so hard, you old hag?" the thug sneered, his voice dripping with arrogance. "We'll get to that monster and put him down. Now, I don't even have to split my share with this idiot. Maybe I should thank you." His swings grew wilder, fueled by the belief that victory was within reach. Despite the odds, the matron did not waver. With only her hairpin, she had infused chakra into her strikes to compensate for her smaller frame. Even as she panted from exertion, she stood tall. "I was entrusted with the care of Konoha's children, those who lost their families before they had the chance to learn how to survive in our world. I have never failed in my duty, and I won't start now." The thug's eyes flicked toward the cracked floor behind the matron, a sign of their prolonged battle. Smirking, he lunged forward with renewed force. The matron misstepped, and his blade bit in her side. But before he could deliver the final blow, a massive surge of violent chakra exploded from behind him. Naruto stood there, his small hands clenched into fists, enveloped in a flickering red chakra cloak. His eyes remained shut, but his voice was an eerie fusion of a deep, guttural growl and a boyish scream. "Get off her!" His eyes snapped open, one the familiar blue of his own, the other an ominous red and black. The thug barely had time to react before the same hairpin that had ended his companion embedded itself deep into his shoulder joint. Naruto's arm moved fluidly, unnaturally, as if guided by an unseen force. He had never even learned to throw a kunai properly, yet his aim had been precise. "Arg, you little brat," the thug roared, ripping the hairpin free and switching his sword to his uninjured hand. His eyes flicked toward the matron, then back to Naruto. "I should have known. I knew I'd be doing the village a favor by killing you, demon child." He took another step forward, but something was wrong. His movements were sluggish. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He tried to lift his sword, but his grip faltered. Naruto, momentarily paralyzed, watched as the thug staggered. His chakra cloak flickered. His eyes returned to their usual blue, confusion clouding his face. He had expected the blade to strike, but instead, the thug crumpled to the ground, eyes rolling back into his head. Naruto blinked, glancing between the fallen man and the matron, who was slowly rising to her feet. In the distance, the sound of shattering glass and urgent voices signaled that the alarm had been triggered. The matron clutched her bleeding side, her voice firm despite her injury. "Listen to me, Naruto. You are neither a demon nor unwanted. I will hold them off, but you need to get to the Hokage Tower as fast as you can, understand?" Naruto hesitated only a moment before nodding. He turned back to the woman who had cared for him as long as he could remember, giving her a brief, tight hug. His gaze lingered on the downed thug. "Why did he fall? I thought he was going to hit me, and there was a voice telling me to run." The matron's expression softened despite the pain. Of course, she knew who the boy's father was. She had always seen his traits shining through. "My pins are poisoned," she admitted. "I was a kunoichi once, Naruto, and that voice in your head? That is not my story to tell. But it's right. You need to run. Take the back entrance and go to the Hokage. Can you do that for me?" Naruto nodded again. The red chakra flared back to life, as if something inside him acknowledged the wisdom of her words. When he spoke, his voice carried a strange duality. "I will keep him safe, unlike this village, which seems incapable of doing so. Don't die on him, lady. He wouldn't be pleased if you did." The matron wanted to reply, to rebuke the fox's sentiment, but something in its tone struck her. There was emotion there, something almost protective. Instead, she offered a faint smile. "I'll try. Now go. Your chakra should have already drawn the ANBU. The seals will hold a little longer." QB empowered, Naruto nodded and disappeared into the night, guided by instinct. His destination was clear. The first step would be to unlock the other half of his chakra, the part that the Namikaze had taken with him. The boy's body was strong enough to bear the strain now. Once that was done, they would reinforce the temple's defenses and begin training in earnest. But first, he needed to reach the temple before anyone could stop him. Fortunately, the whelp trusted him enough to let him guide the way. Council chambers of Konoha, 5 minutes later. While the council was deep in discussion about relieving some taxes on the civilians, an ANBU's sudden arrival at the Sandame's side interrupted the proceedings on the shinobi side. The masked operative was clad in Konoha's standard uniform: black clothing, a gray flak jacket, metal arm guards, gloves, and ninja sandals equipped with spikes for traversing mountainous terrain. 3 ninja pouches were secured at their lower back, and the signature spiral tattoo adorned their shoulder. Hiruzen listened intently to the ANBU's report, his expression darkening with each word. He had sensed a brief, yet potent flare of the QB's chakra. As more details emerged, his complexion paled further. His trusted friend had been rushed to the hospital, her body marred with cuts. 5 thugs had infiltrated the orphanage, 4 lay dead. The last, though subdued by the arriving ANBU, had taken his own life with a suicide pill concealed in his molar before he could be interrogated. Hiruzen rose to his feet, his presence commanding the room. His voice, now cold and sharp, cut through the chatter. "This meeting is adjourned." When the civilian council members attempted to delay him, he released just a sliver of his killing intent. The weight of it was enough to silence any further objections. Without another word, he motioned for the ANBU to follow him, striding toward the hospital with urgency. None among the gathered officials noticed the brief exchange of glances between the three elders, their eyes lingering on their former teammate with unreadable intent. Konoha Hospital, high security ward. Hiruzen had just finished receiving the report from the medical team. It remained uncertain whether his friend would survive. The seals of the orphanage had protected most of the inhabitants from the attack, but it was the one missing person that sent a surge of fury through the Hokage. The initial assessment confirmed that the matron had done her duty with the unwavering will of fire, sacrificing herself to shield the children from harm. The orphanage staff had conducted a head count, and nearly everyone was accounted for. Nearly. And therein lay the problem. Naruto Uzumaki was missing. With no chakra trail to follow and no further information from the matron, Hiruzen had no clue where the boy had gone. Stepping out of the room, he made a quick hand signal. Instantly, a full squad of ANBU materialized, their cloaked forms kneeling in silent readiness. Team Row. Hiruzen addressed them in a calm, yet authoritative tone. Naruto Uzumaki is missing following an attack on the orphanage. The only person who might have insight into his whereabouts is the matron, who is currently recovering in this room behind me. I want a full-time guard station at her bedside, and I expect an immediate report the moment she regains consciousness. The rest of you, track Naruto. I don't need to remind you how crucial this mission is. If the wrong people find him first, the consequences will be dire. The ANBU nodded once before vanishing into the night. Hiruzen could sense that one of them had remained behind to stand guard. He had complete faith in their abilities, but even he recognized that this task might end in failure, unless they could determine where to search. His only hope was that Naruto was safe. Not wasting another moment, Hiruzen summoned one of his trusted messengers and sent word to his student. Jiraiya needed to be informed of this immediately. Meanwhile, with Kurama and Naruto, Konoha outskirts. Kurama was fortunate. His vessel was gifted with certain natural abilities, and with him in control, supplementing the necessary chakra, he was able to suppress their presence entirely. They reached the Uzumaki Mask Temple without incident, navigating the ancient grounds with ease. Locating the masks proved just as effortless. Here and there, hidden seals flickered to life, only to deactivate themselves, as if acknowledging Naruto's rightful presence. This should have erased any lingering doubt about whether the boy truly carried Uzumaki blood. The ritual to don the mask and summon the Shinigami spirit proceeded without complication. When the time came to cut open his stomach to retrieve the sealed half of Kurama's chakra, Naruto seemed to instinctively resist for a fleeting moment, as though his subconscious mind tried to reclaim control. However, Kurama quickly flooded his system with chakra, accelerating the healing process. The situation appeared to have been resolved without further issue. In the seal, Naruto lay fast asleep on a bed crafted from wood and layered with various furs, positioned just in front of the massive cage. The quiet was soon interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps, echoing in the dark expanse before a figure slowly emerged from the shadows. It was a woman with long, flowing red hair, dressed in a simple green summer dress. "Kyubi, what have you done to my little boy?" she demanded, her fiery hair beginning to rise with her rage. From seemingly nowhere, a frying pan materialized in her grip. In a gesture of peace, the massive nine-tailed fox raised its paws. "Now slow down, Kushina. First, I brought the boy here to grow up safely away from Konoha after he was nearly caught by a hit squad today. It's only thanks to the matron of the orphanage and my intervention that he is currently safe." The great beast curled up, watching her with a calm, measured gaze. "I simply ensured that he has access to my full strength, rather than just half, which would have disrupted his chakra balance. But I suppose your husband neglected to mention that." Some of the fire in Kushina's stance dimmed. She opened her mouth as if to argue but found herself speechless. Her lips parted and closed several times, though no words came forth. Kurama let out a satisfied snort. "I admit, he wouldn't have been able to handle my full power at first, the fox continued. But I was advised that it would be wiser to work with the boy rather than against him. That's why I'm channeling some of the chakra that was meant to be purified by the seal to replenish your chakra, Kushina Uzumaki. Again, Kushina was left momentarily stunned, her expression resembling that of a fish gasping for air. She could feel it. Her chakra was indeed being restored. While limited, this meant she could stay by her son's side for some time, watch him grow. Could that truly be a bad thing? Karama, as if reading her thoughts, spoke again. This technique will grant you some time with your boy, but only temporarily. Over time, you will fade. I'm sorry, but even with your and your husband's ingenuity in designing this seal, the nature of chakra imprints remains unchanged. Kushina slowly exhaled. I see, she murmured, still processing everything. She needed a plan, some way to make the most of this strange, unexpected opportunity. And, perhaps more importantly, she needed to figure out how to deal with this new, seemingly cooperative Karama. Well then, she finally said, straightening her back. We need to make the best of it, don't we? I might not be able to teach him incredible jutsu, but I can make sure he knows how to take care of himself, and that you don't corrupt him too much. Karama accepted her words without protest. If you wish, I will teach him Ninshu, as my father intended humans to use it. But before that, he must learn to access the seal, find a safe place to train, and properly unlock his chakra. Right now, he's far too vulnerable. Kushina bit her lower lip, hesitant but undeniably close to being convinced. This powerful, cunning creature, the very same Kyuubi who had wreaked havoc upon Konoha, was now offering to guide her son without demanding anything in return. It went against everything she had known, everything she had feared. So she asked the question lingering in her mind, and the answers she received were not at all what she had expected. 1 week later, Uzumaki Temple. Naruto sat in a lotus position, deep in meditation. He had finally come to terms with the fact that a massive, ancient fox was sealed inside him. Now he focused on finding his chakra. Karama had explained that chakra was the key to starting his training, and only once he succeeded would he be told about his parents. The fox had also reassured him that the seals within the temple would keep him hidden from those who sought to capture him. In the meantime, he had learned how to hunt for food and had even fashioned a makeshift hammock where he could sleep comfortably. Each day, after Karama assisted him in securing his meals, Naruto would sit down to meditate, seeking out his chakra. By Konoha's academy standards, he was a year early in attempting this, but the fox had urged him to continue pushing forward. Today, for the first time, he felt something like dipping his foot into warm water. Encouraged by the voice in his head, he reached deeper and deeper until he grasped something solid. He pulled. It was as if a dam had burst. A strange warmth enveloped him, sending a powerful pulse of chakra surging through the temple. Cracks in the ancient stone walls sealed themselves as if they had never existed. The protective seals of the temple flared to life, restoring their strength. But the sheer intensity overwhelmed Naruto, and he blacked out. In the seal, he found himself walking through a dim corridor lined with towering concrete walls. The air was thick with something unplaceable, but ahead, a warm light beckoned him forward. Drawn toward the glow, he approached and found a fire crackling merrily, the scent of roasted meat filling the air. Standing before the flames, tending to large cuts of meat, was a woman with long, flowing red hair. She turned, smiling at him. You sure took your time, son. Mom, Naruto asks hesitantly, taking small steps toward the woman. She opens her arms in invitation, nodding gently. Without a moment's hesitation, he nearly jumps into her embrace, wrapping his arms around her tightly. They hold onto each other, the warmth of their reunion settling between them in silence. After a few moments, Kushina gently pulls back, holding her son at arm's length. A smile spreads across her face as she looks him over. You look healthy and very handsome, my son. Naruto flushes slightly at the praise before Kushina turns back to her pan, focusing once again on the meal. With practiced ease, she picks up a large piece of meat and tosses it toward the cage in the shadows, where it vanishes into the darkness. The other portion she cuts into smaller pieces, arranging them neatly alongside vegetables on 2 plates. She hands one plate to Naruto, keeping the other for herself, before motioning toward the table. The two of them sit, eating together as Naruto begins to recount his experiences over the years. Kushina listens intently, nodding as she absorbs every word. She is proud, relieved even by how the orphanage had cared for him. Yet, a part of her aches at the thought that neither his godfather nor Mikoto had taken him in. It had been her hope, her wish, that he would have been raised by someone who loved him, someone a bit close to the family. Not that she wanted to talk down the matron who seemingly did a great job, and she had much to be thanked for. But as Naruto continues, sharing the details he had pieced together from history books, she begins to understand. The power struggle in Konoha after the incident had been too great. Hiruzen had fought to maintain order, and taking in the Hokage's orphan son would have been a risk few were willing to shoulder. She lets out a quiet sigh, watching as her son eats, his bright blue eyes full of life despite everything he has endured. He had been strong, stronger than she could have ever imagined. The village had not really found back to its usual stability, and now, with the attack on the orphanage, it just put oil into the fires of greedy men wanting to have more power. Hiruzen had the overwhelming task of maintaining peace, his hands full with the chaos that ensued. Kushina had hoped, perhaps naively, that the village would come together in the aftermath, but her hopes were in vain. Mother and son spoke of many things during their time together. Even Kurama was drawn into the conversation, though Naruto still approached the fox with some apprehension. But in the end, Kushina came to the point. So, as you see, son, I can be with you for some time and teach you about our family, she explained gently, watching him closely for his reaction. Well, as long as you make time to meditate and come here. Meanwhile, Kurama will handle your day-to-day training. We'll focus on our clan's legacy and the things you would have learned at the academy. And so it began. For weeks and months, Naruto threw himself into his studies with unrelenting determination. He quickly realized that mastering cool jutsu wasn't as simple as he had imagined. They required patience, effort, and precise chakra control. The tedious yet essential task of managing his immense chakra reserves became his primary focus. For now, the only jutsu he was permitted to learn was the Henge no Jutsu, a skill crucial for his survival outside of training. Disguised, he ventured into the village, buying and selling goods scavenged from the forests surrounding Konoha. Meat, which he couldn't preserve, along with pelts, horns, and other materials, became his primary trade. Blood had stained his hands early, out of necessity rather than choice, to ensure he maintained a balanced diet. Now, once again, he found himself in the temple, seated in deep concentration. His breathing was slow, controlled, and his mind focused on the steady flow of chakra coursing through his system. He guided it carefully, reinforcing his body and, most importantly, strengthening his chakra network. There was still a long road ahead, but Naruto was ready to walk it. With chakra reserves bordering on that of a Jonin, Naruto needed a chakra network strong enough to support them. While the Uzumaki were naturally gifted with immense reserves and vitality, their true potential was often hindered by a lack of precise control. It was a common struggle within the clan, raw power without the finesse to wield it effectively. Kurama, however, was relentless in his teachings. He drilled the importance of chakra control into Naruto, emphasizing that even the Sage of Six Paths, the very figure shinobi revered as the originator of chakra, often spoken of in the same breath as a deity, had needed to refine his system before achieving true mastery. Training was a necessity, not an option. Every day, a strict portion of time was dedicated to these exercises. It was monotonous, repetitive, and utterly dull, but Naruto soon realized that persistence yielded results. After just a month, his endurance had noticeably increased. He could hunt for an hour longer before exhaustion set in, his body adapting to the enhanced flow of chakra. His older persona thrived as well. He considered using his newfound earnings to purchase ninja tools and scrolls, eager to expand his arsenal. But Kushina urged caution. Not yet, she warned. As long as you haven't truly mastered your power, staying off the radar of Konoha shinobi is your best defense. Naruto understood, even if it frustrated him. For now, patience was the wisest course of action. Hokage's office. Hiruzen gazed out of his window, his pipe resting between his lips as slow, deliberate puffs of smoke curled into the air. His tired eyes drifted across the Hokage monument before settling on the framed pictures of his teachers. He wondered if any of them had ever faced a situation like this, an impossible choice wrapped in uncertainty. The matron was still in a coma, and despite his ANBU's relentless search, there wasn't a single clue as to where the boy had disappeared. A faint pulse of chakra had been detected weeks ago by the barrier team, but it was too indistinct to trace, only that it had originated somewhere near Konoha's walls. Beyond that, there was nothing. No further disturbances, no signs of an attack. And so, the rumors spread. On the streets, people whispered that the Kyuubi brat was dead, that the demon had finally been slain. Hiruzen did nothing to dispel these murmurs. He knew the truth was likely far different, but for now, letting them believe it served a purpose. A Jinchuriki's death was not something that went unnoticed. There was a shift, a rupture in the balance of power, something he had not sensed. It was almost certain that Naruto was alive. That didn't stop him from tightening security. Patrols increased, border checks grew stricter, and tensions among the neighboring villages rose, as they always did. A faint flicker of chakra brushed his senses before his ANBU even had a chance to react. A slight gesture from him held them in place. He didn't need to turn around to know who had arrived. "How many times have I told you to use the door, Jiraiya?" Hiruzen said, exhaling another puff of smoke as he turned slightly. His former student grinned, perched on the windowsill in his usual carefree manner. "I stopped counting before I even made Jonin, sensei," Jiraiya replied as he hopped inside. Without a word, Hiruzen activated the privacy seals before his student could speak further. Jiraiya didn't seem the least bit bothered by the precaution. He simply waited, then got straight to the point once he felt the seals settle. "I haven't found a trace," he admitted, his tone uncharacteristically serious. "The Elder Toad told me he embraces nature and his roots." Jiraiya let out a slow sigh before continuing. "When I asked for clarification, he said Naruto is safe for the foreseeable future and that elements from the upper planes have changed his fate for the better." Hiruzen leaned back, his expression unreadable as he processed the words. "So we're certain that no other village has him?" he asked, his voice carrying the weight of Konoha's spymaster's responsibilities. Jiraiya nodded slowly. "As sure as I can be. I double-checked every lead. There are still places I can't reach, but none of them seem likely. If another village had taken him, we'd be seeing troop movements by now." Despite his calm tone, both men knew there were still gaps in their knowledge, uncertainties that needed addressing. Hiruzen took another slow drag from his pipe before standing. He moved to one of his shelves, rummaging briefly before retrieving a sealed scroll. With practiced efficiency, he unsealed a detailed map of Konoha and its surrounding forests, spreading it across his desk. He held his pipe in one hand while his other traced over the map, searching for something specific. Jiraiya stepped closer, watching his sensei's movements with interest. Finally, Hiruzen's fingers stopped on a small, inconspicuous landmark. "I hadn't considered it before, but Lady Mito once spoke of the Masked Temple, a sacred repository only an Uzumaki can access, at least as long as the seals remain powered," the Hokage mused aloud. Jiraiya's brows rose slightly in recognition. Kushina and Minato mentioned that too. Kushina maintained the place while she lived in Konoha. His gaze shifted to Hiruzen. "You think Naruto might have made his way there?" Hiruzen nodded. Remember what the sage told you. He embraces nature and his roots. He paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. The temple sits on the edge of our borders, deep in the forest. Hashirama Sensei often trained there to strengthen his connection to nature. If Naruto was searching for a link to his heritage, it's the closest place he could reach. Yuzuno Kuni's ruins are far beyond his grasp for now. He exhaled. The seals would recognize him and allow him entry. And more importantly, they would protect him. Jiraiya frowned slightly, considering the implications. Then, another pressing issue came to mind. There's just one problem, Sensei. He met Hiruzen's gaze. If the seals protect him, how do we get him back? He hesitated for a beat. Should we bring him back? The clans are still clawing for power, and thanks to the emergency laws, the civilians still hold too much influence in the council. Hiruzen sighed, his age visible in the deep lines of his face. The weight of past wars, sacrifices, and regrets settled over him. You're right, he admitted, but I was entrusted with his care. Did I fail? His fingers tightened slightly around the pipe before he shook his head. I suppose I'll leave that for the Kami to decide. Either way, we need to make contact. Perhaps he can return to the academy or integrate into our forces in the future. But right now, I know there are factions waiting for the QB to resurface. Jiraiya's lips pressed into a thin line. They both knew that bringing Naruto back prematurely, without a solid plan, would only put him in more danger. For the next hour, they discussed strategies and the best way to approach the situation. Finally, it was decided Jiraiya and Team Ro would attempt to make contact. But this had to be done carefully, quietly. There could be no missteps, no wrong hands catching wind of their plan. They needed to make a good first impression, and that required careful preparation. Days later, with Naruto in the somewhere in Konoha. Naruto hated having to take on his alter ego, but it was necessary. He was on his way back from a local rice farmer, carrying his monthly rations, traded for some of the meat he had gathered from his hunts. The weather was miserable. Rain pounded relentlessly, soaking through his cloak within minutes. The cold seeped into his bones, making him shiver. Great. His meditation would be unpleasant until he dried by the fire. Maybe I should ask Mom or Kurama to teach me a fire jutsu. Lost in thought, he followed the familiar path through the rice fields, the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the water lulling him into a daze. That was until a faint whimper broke through the storm, barely audible over the rumbling thunder. Naruto stopped. He hesitated for a moment, scanning his surroundings. Then, making a split-second decision, he turned toward the sound. As he approached, he spotted an unusual sight. A lone wolf cub, small and frail, lying in the middle of a flooded rice paddy. Its gray fur was soaked, clinging to its thin frame as it shivered violently. Naruto's eyes flicked around, searching for the mother or the rest of the pack. Nothing. No movement, no scent, only the rain and the endless expanse of the field. The cub was alone. He crouched beside it, watching as the small creature weakly turned its head to look at him. Its dull orange eyes met his, barely focused, filled with pain and exhaustion. It wasn't the first time Naruto had seen an abandoned animal. He often stumbled upon creatures left behind by their packs, victims of the unforgiving laws of nature. He reached for his hunting knife, ready to end the suffering swiftly. Wait, Naruto. Kurama's voice cut through his thoughts. Naruto froze. The boy has chakra, more than usual. We can help him, and somehow I have the feeling that we should. Kurama had never led him astray before. That was enough reason to trust him. Naruto hesitated only a moment longer before carefully scooping up the trembling cub, wrapping it in the driest part of his cloak. Without another thought, he turned and disappeared into the rain, heading straight for the temple. Back at the temple. Minutes later, Naruto arrived back at the temple, his cloak dripping as he hurried inside. He placed the cub near the fire, quickly setting to work on kindling the flames to full strength. As the warmth spread, he focused inward, reaching for the seal that connected him to Kurama. How do we treat him, Kurama? Any ideas? I don't even know what kind of jutsu I need, or even how a wolf's body works, to be honest. The word you're looking for is anatomy. And yes, I know what to do. Kurama's voice rumbled in his mind, firm yet patient. Naruto frowned, running a hand through his damp hair. All right, what do I do? Remember the second chakra exercise I taught you? The stimulation thing? Naruto asked, recalling the technique. Yeah, but how does that help him? I mean, it just helps me heal faster, and usually you handle that stuff. Kurama let out a low huff, amused. First of all, I have a feeling this cub is more than just some ordinary animal. If he has this much chakra, he might even surpass the Inuzuka's partners in intelligence. He just needs to learn how to use it properly. Naruto glanced at the wolf cub, who was still trembling, but now watching him with wary curiosity. Cubs learn by watching their parents, Kurama continued. So you need to show him. Place your hand on his body and channel your chakra, just like you did when strengthening your own muscles. Start with circulation. Let him feel the pattern. Then, when you've got the flow steady, push it into the muscles in your legs. I've pulled back my chakra for now, so he'll only sense yours. Naruto nodded and moved to kneel beside the whimpering cub. Carefully, he placed his hand on the matted fur, closing his eyes to focus. At first, the cub stiffened, its small body instinctively tensing at the unfamiliar sensation. But then something changed. Naruto felt it. A flicker of awareness. Curiosity. The cub wasn't just feeling his chakra, it was listening. Naruto kept his focus steady, allowing the energy to flow naturally through his body, guiding it like a river through his muscles. And just as he thought it would take hours, something remarkable happened. The cub copied him. It wasn't perfect. The chakra flickered, unstable and hesitant, but it moved. Slowly, accompanied by soft, relieved whines, the cub mirrored Naruto's technique, circulating the energy through its small body. Naruto watched in fascination. That fast. He had expected this to take days, maybe weeks. But the cub was a quick learner, adjusting on instinct. Encouraged, Naruto took the next step. He pushed his chakra into the aching muscles in his legs, guiding the energy into the sore spots that still throbbed from his earlier sprint. The cub hesitated at first, struggling with the adjustment. But then, realization. The tiny creature let out a small huff and did the same, this time directing its chakra into its own chest, as if reinforcing its breathing. Minutes passed. Then, exhausted but stable, the cub finally drifted off to sleep. Naruto let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Carefully, he moved the small wolf closer to the fire, ensuring it would stay warm through the night. Then, without another word, he settled into meditation, reaching once more for his seal. In the seal, Naruto made his way to the now familiar spot where his mother always waited for him. As soon as he arrived, Kushina greeted him with a warm smile. Son, Kurama already told me about the cub, she said, her tone affectionate. I think you did the right thing. He's adorable, and you might be the first Uzumaki to form a direct bond with an animal partner. She chuckled softly before adding, Unfortunately, we don't have any scrolls on that, even here in the temple. But with your growing control, we should focus on taijutsu and basic sealing. Also, we need to work on increasing your chakra density. Our taijutsu relies heavily on fuinjutsu, so it's all connected. Naruto plopped down beside her, nodding eagerly. Okay, Mom. So what do we start? That density thing sounds cool, but fuinjutsu sounds even better. Oh, and what about the clan jutsu you told me about? Do we just have them? Or do we have to train them? His excitement was palpable, his words tumbling out in a rush. Finally, it seemed like his training was picking up speed. Kushina couldn't help but smile at her son's enthusiasm. Well, we have 3 basic techniques, she explained, counting them off on her fingers. The sealing chains, the mind's eye of Kagura, and the healing bite. Naruto's eyes widened with curiosity, soaking up every word with the same intensity he had during their history lessons on the Uzumaki clan. The chains in the mind's eye can be trained, Kushina continued. The mind's eye isn't just about sensing chakra. It also includes techniques to counter sensors, so we'll focus on that too. Now, different members of our clan have varying levels of skill with these techniques, but the healing bite, that one is mostly passed down among the women of the clan. You have to be born with it. Naruto nodded quickly. So I can learn the chains and the mind's eye, right, Mom? He asked, leaning into her side as she ruffled his hair affectionately. I have an idea about that, Kurama cut in, his voice deep and thoughtful. Maybe we can refine the basic chains and create something more. But first, you'll need to master the standard Uzumaki chains. It was no surprise that Naruto immediately chose to start with the chains. He could already see how useful they would be in battle. Kushina agreed, and so they began with the first step, raising the density of his chakra. All right, son, listen up. Kushina's expression turned serious. There are two main ways to increase the density of something. First, we can increase or decrease the temperature. She paused, smirking. But that's incredibly difficult with chakra, so we're going with option 2, increase the pressure. With a larger smile, she summoned a single golden chain from her back, letting it gleam in the dim light of the temple. For this to work, you need to channel chakra through a tenketsu point like this. She let the chain vanish, then extended her palm. A steady stream of dark blue chakra leaked from it in a controlled flow. See this color? She asked. That's what we're aiming for. When I first started training, I drew a small symbol on my palm to help me focus. It gave me something to target when pushing my chakra out. Once you can produce this instantly, we'll move on to the second stage. She pulled a small pan from her pack, placing it in front of them. A moment later, she channeled her chakra again, using it to push the pan forward without touching it. You'll start with a pebble and gradually increase the size of the objects. But, as you might remember, chakra alone, without shape or elemental manipulation, doesn't do a great job pushing things. That's why control is important. Naruto nodded, already channeling his chakra to his palm. A faint flicker of light blue energy seeped out before it suddenly stung him, causing him to flinch and lose control. Kushina's brow arched. What did I tell you about starting training before I finished explaining, young man? Naruto grumbled. That I shouldn't. Her raised eyebrow demanded that he say it louder. That I shouldn't, he mumbled again, this time more clearly. Kushina softened, pulling him into a brief hug. Exactly. Did it sting? Naruto nodded. That happens when your chakra isn't flowing correctly. Combine this exercise with the techniques Kurama taught you. Normally, you'd master water walking before trying this, but with the chakra control you've already developed, it might be enough. She gave him a pointed look before he could ask anything else. If not, we'll focus on that first. Your father had similar struggles when he created his own jutsu, but you're not quite ready for those techniques yet. Naruto pouted slightly, but didn't argue. Well, Kushina continued, standing up. Let's see your progress. But no more than 2 hours of training. Then you're sleeping, no arguments. She gave him a knowing look, fully aware that without strict limits, he'd train himself into mental exhaustion. 2 weeks later. For the next 2 weeks, Naruto poured everything he had into mastering the density technique, starting with its first and second stages. After 10 days, he noticed a difference. His usual light blue chakra had darkened slightly, indicating an increase in density. He also realized that his chakra-enhanced strength had improved. It wasn't dramatic, but everything just felt more efficient. The wolf cub never left his side. It even accompanied him on hunts, yipping excitedly whenever they successfully caught fresh prey. The little creature demanded his share every time, which Naruto found oddly endearing. By the end of the first week, something even more surprising happened. Naruto was certain he could understand the cub's sounds and body language perfectly. Every order he gave was followed to the letter, and the two of them quickly developed a silent understanding. They were growing together. Naruto could feel it. Start of the winter period, outside of the Uzumaki temple. It had taken longer than expected to organize everything. They had to be meticulous, ensuring that their preparations didn't raise suspicion. Supplies were gradually sealed into scrolls over time, their movements carefully spaced out to avoid patterns. Rations were packed, and patrol routes were subtly adjusted. The goal was simple: make the temple forgettable, just another abandoned relic of Konoha's past. The last thing they needed was for Naruto's enemies to notice a specific group of ANBU repeatedly visiting a seemingly unimportant location. The newly reinforced seals around the temple made direct contact impossible. No one could approach the area without alerting the defensive mechanisms in place. Because of this, Jiraiya and Team Ro had carefully chosen a drop point, one easily accessible from the temple's side but well hidden from the outside world. Now, standing at the secluded site, the team leader cast a glance at Jiraiya as they placed the finishing touches on the hidden cache. "Are you sure this is going to work, Master Jiraiya?" he asked slowly, his tone edged with uncertainty. Jiraiya, who had just finished inscribing the final layer of protective seals, glanced over his shoulder. "Yes, I'm sure." He let out a small sigh, straightening up. "Those seals around the temple are too strong. There's no way they haven't been maintained in the last year, which means someone inside has to be refueling them. That alone confirms the location. Now, we just have to hope he checks this drop and actually uses what we left for him." The team leader gave a sharp nod, signaling to his squad. They were still 2 men short, one assigned to guarding the matron, the other recovering in preparation to take over the next shift. So far, no one had made another attempt on the old woman's life, though the tension in the air remained thick. Word had spread, Tsunade was on her way. The last of their work was completed in silence. Once satisfied, Jiraiya and the team quickly withdrew, using silent hand signals to fade into the surrounding terrain. Jiraiya hated this approach. Every fiber of his being told him to storm the temple, get Naruto out, and disappear into the night. But he knew better. The seals were too strong. Breaking through them would cause a mess, one that would draw far too much attention. He wouldn't risk it. Not yet. For now, all he could do was hope. Hope that his godson would find the scroll. Hope that he would read it, understand it. And most of all, hope that it would be enough to get him through the coming winter. Jiraiya's gaze lingered on the hidden drop point for a moment longer before he turned away, moving swiftly to where an ANBU operative kept quiet watch over the site. All they could do now was wait. Inside the masked temple, Naruto knelt beside the wolf cub, his hand resting lightly on its back. "All right, the plan is simple," he whispered. "You go out, take a sniff at the cache, and if you can grab anything, bring it back to me." The cub gave a single nod, but remained still, waiting for further instructions. "We wait until close to midnight," Naruto continued. "Your senses are way better than mine in the dark. If you can pick up how many people are keeping watch, that'd be even better." Once again, the cub nodded. A moment later, it let out a small, eager yip, tail wagging slightly. It was excited, almost too excited, as if it wanted to prove itself useful. Naruto chuckled softly, ruffling the fur on its favorite spot. All right, he murmured. "I get it. You're ready." The cub let out a quiet huff, then settled into a crouch, ready to move at a moment's notice. Naruto shifted his position, closing his eyes as he focused on his breathing. He needed to prepare. If his partner ran into trouble, he had to be ready to react instantly. With that thought, he settled into meditation, steadily channeling chakra through his body. He wouldn't move unless he had to, but if the cub needed him, he'd be there in an instant. Shortly after midnight, outside of the temple, the youngest member of the team, codenamed Weasel, had drawn the short straw and was assigned to stand guard. He didn't quite understand why they needed to watch a dead mailbox, but he knew better than to question orders. If there was one thing he took seriously, it was duty, regardless of his age. Perched high in the trees at his observation post, he remained perfectly still, his sharp eyes scanning the area. Then, something unusual caught his attention. A wolf cub. Weasel watched as the small creature slowly crept toward the drop point. It was cautious, testing the edge of the barrier seals Master Jiraiya had shown them. Only its front paws crossed the invisible line as it lifted its snout into the air, sniffing curiously. Weasel tensed. For a brief moment, the cub's golden eyes locked onto his own. His breath hitched. Had he been spotted? The momentary shock caused him to falter, and in that split second, the cub vanished from his line of sight. Damn it! When his eyes found it again, it was already bounding away, a scroll clutched tightly in its jaws. What? Snapping into action, Weasel leaped from his post and took up the chase. His movements were quick, fluid. He was gaining on the cub. But just as he was about to intercept, a blinding flash of light erupted in the darkness. The night was momentarily illuminated as if lightning had struck mere feet away. The sudden burst of brightness burned at Weasel's retinas, forcing him to stumble back as his vision blurred. By the time his watery eyes adjusted, the cub was already behind the barrier. Weasel stilled, pulse racing. Whatever that was, it wasn't normal. He needed to report this immediately. With a flicker of his body, he disappeared into a flock of crows. Back with Naruto. Naruto knelt near the fire, waiting for his companion's return. When the small wolf suddenly leaped into his arms at full speed, scroll still clenched between his teeth, Naruto was momentarily caught off guard. "Whoa! Hey, buddy!" he exclaimed, steadying himself. As he set the cub down, his nose twitched. Ozone. The sharp scent clung to the wolf's damp fur. Naruto's brows furrowed as he picked up the scroll. His mind replayed the flash of light he had seen in the distance. "Tell me," Naruto mused aloud, turning to his companion. "Did you just use a Raitan jutsu? That flash, it was really bright." The wolf cub tilted his head, ears perking in curiosity. Naruto thought for a moment, then had an idea. Forgetting the scroll for now, he raised his hand and let a small amount of blue chakra escape from his palm, letting it hover like a flickering flame. "The light back there," Naruto said, his eyes locked on his friend. "Did you do it with this?" He pointed at the chakra. The cub's ears twitched. Then, in a burst of excitement, he nodded, hopping in place before suddenly concentrating. A heartbeat later, small arcs of electricity crackled through his fur. Naruto's mouth fell open. "Whoa!" He blinked, then grinned. "That was awesome." He reached down, ruffling the cub's fur as the young wolf let out a pleased yip. "All right, I know what to call you now," Naruto declared. "How about Raitaro? Son of the Thunder God. Sound impressive, just like you." The cub barked happily, practically beaming with pride as Naruto continued scratching his head. "Yeah, Raitaro suited him perfectly." In the temple, the next morning. After the initial excitement of discovering that Raitaro could use jutsu, Naruto had eagerly shared the news with Kurama and his mother during their nightly session. But now, his focus returned to the scroll. Unrolling it carefully, he hadn't expected to see so many storage seals. He took his time, checking the matrix, just as his mother had taught him, before unsealing the first compartment with a small drop of blood and chakra. Another scroll appeared. Curious, Naruto opened it, only to find that it contained a letter. "Hello, Naruto. I hope you're well. I can't begin to imagine what you have endured in these past weeks following the attack. We are still searching for those responsible, but to my deep regret, they have covered their tracks well. I wish I could guarantee your safety, but with you being protected by your clan seals, you are currently more secure than I could ever hope to provide. Given that, I suspect you may even be enjoying the freedom and peace your current situation offers. I can only assume that you have no desire to return for the foreseeable future. Be that as it may, I hope to convince you to come back sooner rather than later. Perhaps even enroll in the academy, fulfill your dream of becoming a shinobi, and, if I recall correctly, succeed me as Hokage." To aid you in this, I have included copies of Academy textbooks and instructional scrolls. I hope you find them useful. As you have likely noticed, we have set up a communication drop on the outskirts of the seals. I have placed my most trusted ANBU in charge of guarding the site. Unfortunately, even they cannot watch over it 24/7 without drawing unnecessary attention. I originally planned to discuss the next matter with you when you were older, but I suspect you may have already encountered him. Perhaps, in some way, we even have him to thank for your continued safety. Naruto skimmed ahead, quickly realizing what followed, the story of how he became the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki. Already covered that, he thought, rolling his eyes. Mom and Kurama had explained everything weeks ago. Still, he had to give it to the old man. Hiruzen's words were kind. The Hokage even thanked Kurama for keeping Naruto safe, or at least hoped that had been his intention. Naruto wasn't so sure about that last part. Either way, he'd go over the letter later with his mother and Kurama in the seal space. What did interest him, though, was the Hokage's offer. More supplies. Hiruzen still considered him his ward and wanted to provide for him. The offer meant less hunting, which Naruto liked, but he knew what his mother and Kurama would say. You need to be strong, and hunting will make you stronger. Still, it was tempting. Maybe not food, but something useful. His knife was good for close range, but something for distance? A bow, maybe? The second letter came from Jiraiya, full of apologies, full of the same reassurances. And, of course, the offer to take Naruto away, even if it went against the Hokage's wishes. Hiruzen didn't consider Jiraiya's work safe, but the old pervert still offered to take Naruto with him. Not happening, Naruto thought. He was staying put. He had Raitaro, and in the seal space, his mother and Kurama kept him company. His occasional trips into Konoha to sell his goods gave him just enough human interaction for his taste. Right now, his priority was improving. Besides, the academy textbooks would be useful, more structured learning. And given that his mother had casually mentioned that the old man was once called the professor, Naruto had expected nothing less than a pile of study material. He wouldn't complain, though. It would keep him busy. Maybe he'd even advance faster through the material. After all, he had two amazing teachers. Naruto's eyes lingered on the final lines of Hiruzen's letter, his lips curving into a relieved smile. The matron survived, something I am deeply grateful for. She is a good friend and one of the few people I trusted to care for you properly. She remains in a coma, but I hold hope that my student, Tsunade, will be able to help her once she returns. I am sure that, when she wakes, she will be as proud of your accomplishments as I am, Naruto. Naruto exhaled slowly, letting the words settle. She survived. A small weight he hadn't realized he was carrying lifted. For the first time in a long while, he felt just a little lighter. Naruto stood in the temple's hidden training chamber, a concealed underground space that only revealed itself when the right seals were activated. A narrow staircase led down to a vast network of cavernous rooms, their temperature stabilized by geothermal heating. These rooms had become Naruto and Raitaro's refuge when they weren't out hunting. The supplies stored within the scroll he'd found had been a blessing, allowing him to limit his hunts and focus on training instead. He had exchanged letters with the old man, the Hokage, who had been impressed by Naruto's rapid progress. Over the winter, Naruto had completed the first 2 years of academy studies and passed the small test given by his professor. But perhaps the most exciting development was the arrival of his new weapon, a Yumi, a traditional Japanese short bow. Its slightly curved ends and leather-wrapped grip made for a refined and powerful tool, accompanied by what Naruto had dubbed the Care Manual of Archery, a detailed guide on storing the bow, crafting arrows, and maintaining the weapon. At first, drawing the bowstring had been a struggle. His arms trembled under the strain, and his shots went so wide that retrieving his arrows became an exhausting ordeal. Frustrated but determined, Naruto had been ready to push through the pain when Kurama intervened, reminding him to use his chakra to reinforce his muscles until he built enough strength to manage on his own. Fueled by his usual stubborn persistence, Naruto trained relentlessly, shooting arrow after arrow until exhaustion rendered him unable to lift the bow. His aim gradually improved, and his movements became more fluid, but true mastery remained a distant goal, one he was determined to reach. As he honed his archery, Naruto also made progress in another field, chakra control. The daily use of chakra while practicing with his bow had a surprising side effect. It had strengthened his reserves to the point where he could finally begin training in the Uzumaki clan's unique jutsu. A few days ago, his mother had appeared to him through the seal, guiding him after noticing his chakra had darkened to a deep blue hue. "Listen up, son," Kushina began, her voice firm but affectionate. "Do you remember the lesson about hand seals?" Naruto nodded. "Good." She smiled. Hand seals help shinobi mold their chakra properly, so they can use different jutsu. For our clan techniques, it's similar, but also a little different. To keep our secrets safe and to preserve our legacy, Uzumaki jutsu can only be used by our bloodline. She paused, her expression softening. Some of us have a natural instinct for them, like your awesome mom, for example. I could summon my chains without any instruction or hand seals. Kushina smirked at the memory, but others need guidance to unlock their potential. Naruto's face fell slightly, but she quickly continued. Not that it means anything for your proficiency. Even Ashina Uzumaki, one of the greatest masters of Fuin Jutsu, needed Lady Mito's help before he could manifest his chains, and he was unmatched in sealing techniques. That lifted Naruto's spirits. He had read about Ashina and Mito Uzumaki. Mito, the wife of Hashirama Senju, had been known as the goddess of scrolls for her mastery of sealing. Unlike her husband, she never used ninjutsu offensively. Her immense strength, chakra chains, and sealing techniques alone had been enough to overpower any foe. Ashina, meanwhile, had been the only one to surpass her in Fuin Jutsu. "So, my son, we'll start with the basic hand seals for the sealing chain technique. You're only allowed to practice these in an Uzumaki training ground, and can only use them in battle if your life depends on it, until you can summon them without hand seals." Understood. That conversation had marked the beginning of Naruto's journey into the Uzumaki arts of the chains and the mind's eye. Now, months later, Naruto had made steady progress. He had reduced the number of hand seals needed to form his chains and had even stumbled upon an accidental discovery. He wasn't limited to just chain forms. However, Kushina and Kurama had immediately forbidden him from experimenting further until he mastered the basics. The real breakthrough came near the end of the first month of the new year. Naruto and Raitaro had practically danced with joy, the latter joining in simply because his hunting partner was celebrating. Naruto had reached a major milestone. Having mastered the basics of his chains, Kushina had finally introduced him to the mind's eye of the Kagura. At first, sensing chakra offensively had been difficult. He struggled to keep his mind's eye open while focusing on anything else. But with practice, he improved rapidly. The defensive application, however, came to him almost effortlessly. He could now suppress his chakra presence without even thinking about it. Kurama theorized that the supply runs they had done, where Naruto frequently used this technique, had already trained his system to integrate the jutsu. Kushina, on the other hand, just boasted that her son was as awesome as she was. Naruto mostly appreciated that he could now visit the village without Kurama having to take control. During his visits, he also noticed an odd pattern. The ANBU only appeared on a regular, monthly basis. The Hokage had mentioned that the weekly supply deliveries wouldn't last forever, but Naruto didn't mind. He liked exchanging letters with the old man and valued the supplies, but he had been raised to be self-sufficient. Kushina had made sure of that, wanting him to be both safe and skilled. Neither she nor Kurama knew how long they could remain with him. Raitaro had grown over the past months, and, to Naruto's amusement, had started joining him in chakra-based training. This led to some unexpected and hilarious moments, like the time Naruto reached out to pet him and got a sudden jolt of electricity because the cub had been circulating chakra. In retaliation, Naruto had summoned his chains to trap the mischievous fox, turning it into a game of cat and mouse between them. Kurama's lessons on chakra manipulation had been more serious, particularly when it came to understanding yin and yang release. He explained that if Naruto wanted to refine his Uzumaki chain techniques, he needed to grasp these fundamental aspects of chakra, especially Jintan, the yin-based ability to manifest things purely from imagination. Kurama had also tried to teach Naruto an advanced illusion technique that Kitsune could pass on to their Jinchuriki. However, after several failed attempts, they both admitted defeat. While Naruto could easily break through illusions using his mind's eye, casting them himself was another matter entirely. The Mighty Nine Tails had not taken this failure well. Kurama had been on the verge of apologizing before suddenly pausing, as if sensing something. Maybe there's another way, he murmured before withdrawing in a thought. Naruto, busy juggling multiple areas of training, silently thanked whatever higher powers there were that Kurama had postponed yet another lesson. He'd never admit it to the fox's face, but he was grateful for the break. Hokage office, deep at night. That is disturbing, you are sure? The Sandaime spoke to the ANBU with the raven mask who dropped the mask, showing a 16 to 17-year-old Shursui Uchiha. Yes, I am afraid that if things get worse, I need to use my jutsu to prove Shursui's side. Not stop it, but hopefully prevent it, he corrected himself. Hiruzen nodded slowly, his expression darkening. He had feared this moment for some time. Ever since the Kyuubi attack, whispers had spread through the village. Some shinobi had seen the beast with Sharingan in its eyes. That single detail had planted a seed of suspicion, leading many to believe that an Uchiha had been responsible for controlling the Nine Tails and unleashing it upon the village. Had Fugaka been more open to discussing the matter, perhaps they could have quelled these suspicions. But the Uchiha clan head had adamantly insisted that there were no rogue Uchiha involved, a stance that only fueled the growing distrust. Over time, the clan had become increasingly isolated, shunned by many within Konoha, particularly by the older shinobi clans. Sandaime-sama. Shursui's voice cut through Hiruzen's thoughts, slightly raised to regain the Hokage's attention. Hiruzen exhaled, realizing he had drifted into contemplation. My apologies, Shursui. Please continue. Shursui nodded, unbothered. As I was saying, we cannot afford a civil war right now. Itachi understands this, and he's willing to do what he can to help. However, for us to focus on preventing conflict, we'll both need to resign from the ANBU. He reached up, removed his mask, and placed it on the Hokage's desk. Hiruzen accepted it without hesitation. Understandable, Hiruzen said, his voice heavy with the weight of the situation. If the two of you can prevent bloodshed, I will do everything in my power to support your efforts. However, your resignations present another problem. He leaned back slightly, taking a deep drag from his pipe. A certain mailbox will lose its caretakers. Shursui was silent for a moment, thinking, then his expression cleared. I believe I have a solution, Hokage-sama. If you permit it. Hiruzen gave a slight nod of approval. Reaching into his robes, Shursui produced a small scroll. First, I can gift this to the monk. It contains a summoning contract for ravens. He could use them to deliver messages. While it may take some time for him to summon his first raven, it's better than leaving the line of communication abandoned. I have no immediate next of kin to entrust it to. Hiruzen listened carefully, his gaze sharp as Shursui continued. Additionally, if all else fails, I would ask you to induct Izumi Uchiha into the ANBU. While she may seem mediocre in skill now, I can personally vouch for her potential. Under the right training, she will grow into a capable operative. Her mother left the clan before the Kyuubi incident, and because of that, both she and her mother are treated as outcasts. He paused before adding, which, I understand. Hiruzen interrupted, his tone thoughtful. He studied Shursui for a long moment before speaking again. You intend for Izumi to take over the caretaker duty of the mailbox when she isn't training. And since she is known to interact with Itachi, you hope that by keeping her close to him, she might prevent him from falling should you fail. Shursui exhaled slowly, nodding once. Hiruzen closed his eyes for a brief moment before reopening them. You and Itachi are true shinobi. To be prepared to stand against your own family, if necessary. That is not an easy burden to bear. Shursui didn't respond immediately. Instead, he silently sealed the scroll away again. It would be included in the next transmission to the monk. When he looked back at the Hokage, there was something tired in his gaze, though his lips curled slightly in bitter amusement. Thank you, Lord Hokage. I only hope that none of these contingencies are ever needed. But I am trying to change the minds of an entire clan of Jinjutsu users by using Jinjutsu. He chuckled, but the sound was hollow. The irony isn't lost on me. Hiruzen offered no response, merely watching as Shursui turned and left the office. In the following days, Shursui personally oversaw Izumi Uchiha's recruitment into ANBU. Using a light Jinjutsu, he subtly ensured that she was prepared to be brought into the fold. Her primary mission? To act as a hidden contact within the organization, maintaining the secret line of communication with the monk. The only classified information she received was that there was a surviving Uzumaki recluse living in the temple, someone the Hokage wished to keep in contact with. Shortly after, Izumi disappeared from the public eye, her name fading from the records of ordinary life in Konoha. She was relocated to the ANBU barracks for intensive training, restricted to mission zones and the shadows of the village. She also inherited Shursui's Raven Mask. Mid-71, Uzumaki Mask Temple. Naruto had been utterly astonished when a complete stranger had gifted him a summoning contract. Even after Shursui Uchiha himself had explained his reasons, Naruto still found it hard to believe. The gesture had been unexpected, and so had Shursui's warning about the Uchiha clan in the village, something that Kurama had wholeheartedly supported. At first, Naruto had struggled to use the contract. It wasn't surprising. He had rarely used his chakra in the conventional way. His experience with ninjutsu had been minimal at best, limited to studying the academy texts on the basic 3 jutsu. His mother had already told him that the standard clone jutsu was beyond his reach. He simply had too much chakra to perform it properly. The substitution jutsu, however, was a different matter. It had been prioritized in his training, as its advanced counterpart, the body flicker, would only be possible once he mastered another challenge Kushina had set for him. Sitting within the seal, Kushina had taken on the role of his instructor, her voice animated as she guided him. Okay, sweetheart, I think it's time to dive into ninjutsu. Your taijutsu is coming along nicely, and your fuinjutsu progress? Well, that's basically like mine, so no worries there. She grinned proudly before adding, Now, in Konoha, according to the syllabus Hiruzen gave us, this wouldn't be covered in the academy yet, but we're way cooler than that stuffy place anyway, right? Naruto nodded eagerly, mirroring her enthusiasm, while Kurama huffed from within his cage. 2 Uzumaki together were always a force to be reckoned with. All right, back to business. Kushina continued, eyes sparkling with excitement. Your future Jonin instructor will probably test you on this, but lucky for you, we're in the Uzumaki Mass Temple. That means we do things traditionally. Since I'm your de facto Jonin instructor, I'm taking over that duty the Uzumaki way. She puffed out her chest with pride. She let Naruto absorb that before continuing. Normally, you'd be given a piece of chakra-conductive paper. When you channel chakra into it, it reacts to show your elemental affinity or affinities. She gave him a moment to take it in, then pressed on. All right, here's what I want you to do. In the scroll storage, one of the first shelves should have a scroll marked with all 5 elemental kanji. Find it, study the instructions for each jutsu inside, and mark down how many attempts it takes you to perform each one. Naruto scribbled down notes, his excitement mounting. Finally, elemental ninjutsu. Lately, He had felt a twinge of jealousy toward Raitaro. The wolf cub had no trouble at all channeling chakra in an elemental way. It seemed completely natural to him. Naruto was determined to catch up. It took 2 months of intense training, but Naruto finally mastered the 5 elemental starter jutsu. For Katan, he had learned Ember, a simple technique that allowed him to light a small fire. It wasn't anything impressive, more useful for starting a campfire than for battle. Maybe, when he was older, he could use it to light a pipe like the old man. His Suiton technique had come much easier. It was one of his faster elements. Called Fountain, it produced a small burst of clean, drinkable water. Again, not a combat technique, but highly useful for survival. Futon was a handy one, especially with all the fallen leaves around the temple. Breeze created a short but forceful gust of wind, scattering debris and clearing pathways with ease. None of these jutsu were designed for battle. They weren't ranked techniques, just introductory ninjutsu meant to get a student started on their elemental training. Pure utility. Doton had been the slowest of his stronger elements to develop. Soften Earth didn't create a pit or an impressive tremor. It merely loosened the ground enough to make digging easier. And Raitun? Well, that one had the most mischievous potential. It allowed Naruto to zap whoever he shook hands with, sending a small, harmless shock through their palm. Perfect for pranks. It wasn't much, but it was a start, and Naruto knew better than anyone. Every journey had to begin somewhere. In the seal, just after Naruto managed the last jutsu, Kushina beamed with pride. Well done, my son. 3 elemental affinities. Impressive. I'm so proud of how quickly you mastered the test. She tilted her head in curiosity. I do wonder where that Doton comes from, though. Your father was well known for his futon, and I've always been gifted in Suiton. That would be my doing, rumbled the deep voice of the Kyuubi, drawing both mother and son's attention toward him. Kurama had remained mostly silent lately, letting Kushina take over Naruto's training once the basics were covered. What he hadn't told either of them was that he had to concentrate to maintain Kushina's presence. It required careful chakra management, but it was a price he was willing to pay to give them more time together. Besides, the arrangement gave him some peace, and it helped Naruto prepare for the sync training they would eventually undergo. When the time was right, he would take over once again. Kushina narrowed her eyes slightly. Your interference? She asked, prompting Kurama to elaborate. The great fox cracked open one eye lazily. Yes, something I started after we figure out the brat is absolutely hopeless at illusions. He scoffed with a huff of irritation. Naruto immediately mimicked the sound. Only his version came with a full pout. Kurama ignored it and continued. I refuse to let the kid be weak just because he isn't compatible with my skills. He is my Jinchuriki, and I won't have my siblings rubbing in my face that my container is the weakest of a 9. That was all he said before shutting his eye and settling back in his sleep, though not before giving Naruto a small nod in acknowledgement of his muttered thank you. Naruto turned back to his mother, eyes bright with curiosity. You were going to explain the theory behind the summoning jutsu, Mom? Kushina blinked before nodding. All right, so the summoning jutsu is a space-time ninjutsu, which, as you may already know, has its roots in Fuinjutsu. She picked up a nearby wooden branch and began scratching a complex formula into the ground. With a practiced hand, she pointed to various kanji etched into the dirt. See these? They represent space, transportation, and time. There are 2 main ways summoning works. The first allows you to summon inanimate objects, like weapons or stored supplies. The second, and more common, is summoning a contracted familiar or a clan of summons. She paused, tapping the diagram thoughtfully. Actually, I think we could apply this to your arrows. We could create a seal that lets you recall them after you shoot. Naruto's face lit up with excitement at the idea, but his enthusiasm was immediately crushed by Kushina's next words. Not that I'm going to show you how just yet, she added with a smirk. You already have a summoning contract. I want you to focus on mastering that first. Try using it now. Feel the flow of your chakra And if you can reduce the number of hand seals required, then we'll talk about integrating it into your arrows. Naruto groaned, but relented. It took time, but he eventually managed to perform the summoning technique properly. The ravens were mischievous creatures, but took a liking to him almost immediately. The bond only deepened when he took them with him on a supply run to Konoha. On that trip, Naruto witnessed something that struck a nerve. One of the shop owners mistreated an orphan right in front of him. The sight brought back memories of his time in the orphanage. The matron had done everything in her power to make sure the children were cared for, always ensuring they felt safe and loved. Seeing someone treat an orphan with such disdain enraged him. Naruto took it personally. With the help of his ravens and Raitaro, he devised a plan. Over the next few weeks, he systematically pranked every single shop owner or vendor he had gathered enough intel on. The ravens acted as messengers, delivering prank materials and relaying his target's movements. His meticulous execution paid off. Each prank was flawless. When he sent a report of his actions to the Hokage via his summoned ravens, he received an unexpected response. The old man found the situation amusing and, much to Naruto's surprise, classified his actions as official missions. Hiruzen had marked them down as 1D-rank mission for the execution of the pranks and a C-rank mission for the quality of intelligence he had gathered. Without even being part of the shinobi forces yet, Naruto now had 2 signed mission scrolls, ones he could submit whenever he officially joined. He had thought about it. The idea of joining the shinobi ranks was tempting, but he decided to wait until he was at least 11. That was still the minimum age for graduation, and the idea of spending more time in the academy didn't appeal to him in the slightest. He much preferred learning from scrolls and his mother. Of course, he never told anyone about that. He simply completed the tests the Hokage sent him and returned them. Hiruzen had warned him, though, when the time came for Naruto to join the shinobi forces, the Hokage would need to personally assess his skills. On a brighter note, Naruto received word that the matron from the orphanage had finally woken up after receiving a brief visit from Tsunade. The legendary Sannin hadn't stayed long. She had arrived, performed her work, and left just as quickly. Naruto didn't care about the details. All that mattered was that the woman who had treated him with kindness for all those years, the one who had defended him with her very life, would get to see more of the world. And that, more than anything, made him happy. Sarutobi Clan Compound. Hiruzen sat across from the still-recovering matron, watching as she carefully read through the latest letters from Naruto. Though her voice was still a little raspy, her expression had begun to soften, and with each letter she read, a small smile crept on her face, one that grew wider with every line. Setting the scroll down for a moment, she took a sip of her tea and looked up at the Hokage with newfound ease. He really made the best of his situation, she murmured, her voice carrying a mixture of pride and relief. She shook her head slightly before adding, I never would have imagined that a Biju could take such good care of his so-called prison. Hiruzen nodded in agreement, his own skepticism long since faded. Indeed, I had my doubts at first, but given what has happened, and from everything you've told me, I can only come to the same conclusion. The matron studied him for a moment before leaning back at her chair with a knowing sigh. I suppose that's also why you didn't challenge the rumors about the Kyuubi's final death, isn't it, Hiruzen? The Hokage's battle-worn face twitched into a rare, amused grin. How will he ever claim his inheritance if the world believes he's dead? She asked, her tone carrying both concern and curiosity. Hiruzen exhaled, his gaze turning distant for a moment before he finally answered. Oh, I have no doubt the boy will have more than enough skill to back up his claim when the time comes. Forest of Konoha, summertime. Naruto knelt beside Raitaro, his sharp eyes scanning the clearing ahead. His partner had picked up the scent of something larger this time, and they had tracked it carefully through the underbrush. Now, they stood at the edge of an open space, observing a tense struggle between 2 beasts. A massive snake had coiled itself tightly around an equally large bear. Both creatures were far bigger than the norm, and when Naruto activated his mind's eye, his suspicions were confirmed. Both of them had chakra. At first glance, the bear seemed like the stronger of the two. It had a larger chakra reserve, which should have given it the advantage in breaking free from the serpent's grip. But just as Naruto whispered his observation to Raitaro, the wolf cub bared his fangs and let out a low whimper. That small sound drew Naruto's gaze downward, where he noticed something crucial. The snake's fangs were already buried deep in the bear's flesh. Poison. Naruto's grip on his bow tightened. Quickly and silently, he knocked an arrow, drawing it back until the string nearly touched his cheek. Holding the bow steady still required conscious effort. His muscles weren't yet strong enough to do it without chakra reinforcement. He let his energy flow through his arms, steadying his aim, and then let it trickle into his eyes. The effect was immediate. His vision sharpened, bringing out details he wouldn't have noticed otherwise. The subtle tightening of the snake's muscles, the bear's weakening struggle, the glistening sheen of venom still dripping from the serpent's fangs. Everything became clearer. Interesting. Maybe this could be turned into a jutsu later. A thought for another time. Exhaling slowly, he released the arrow. A sharp whistle cut through the air, followed by a muted thud as the arrow struck true. It wasn't a perfect shot, not dead center as he had aimed, but it was close enough. The snake let out a final, dying hiss before its massive body slumped to the ground, motionless. Naruto and Raitaro wasted no time. They jumped down into the clearing, cautiously approaching the two fallen creatures. Raitaro sniffed to the air before glancing back at Naruto and nodding once. Naruto edged closer, a fresh arrow at the ready, just in case. Activating his mind's eye once more, he checked for lingering life signs. Nothing. Both were completely still. Satisfied, he knelt beside the snake and examined the puncture wounds it had inflicted on the bear. Even now, the fangs continued to drip venom. Looking at his partner, he mused, "What do you think? It's good to have an edge, isn't it?" Raitaro seemed to ponder the question before giving a single nod. That was all Naruto needed. The next step was figuring out how to extract the venom. He wasn't sure of the process yet, but he could always consult Kushina and Kurama. For now, he sealed both carcasses into a storage scroll. He'd deal with them later. That conversation, however, did not go as planned. The moment he brought it up, Kushina shot down the idea with a firm shake of her head. Absolutely not. You have no one around to help if something goes wrong. It's too dangerous to experiment with poisons on your own. Naruto sighed, ready to argue, but before he could, Kurama's deep voice cut through the discussion. Let him do it. Kushina stiffened and turned to glare at the great fox. Excuse me. Kurama cracked open one eye, his presence suddenly pressing. Before you start on one of your episodes, think about it again. Kushina faltered, narrowing her eyes in thought. But when no immediate reason came to her, the fox huffed in irritation. There isn't a single poison or venom in the 5 nations that could truly threaten an Uzumaki with me sealed inside him. His vitality and regeneration are leagues beyond normal humans. So stop being such a scaredy cat. Kushina blinked, processing the statement. Then, to Naruto's amusement, she actually blushed slightly. Naruto had remained quiet throughout the exchange, but now he tilted his head toward the fox. I don't really understand all of that, Kurama, but could you maybe not be so hard on her? She's just looking out for me. That seemed to catch both of them off guard. Kushina smiled softly. It's all right, son, she reassured him, her voice lighter now. He's right, after all. While Kurama can purge poisons and venoms from your system, your body will start adapting to them over time. It was the same for me during the war. She moved closer, wrapping her arms around him in a brief but warm hug before sitting beside him on the bench within the sealed space. At the beginning of the war, the stronger poisons would put me in the hospital for a week, ones that would have killed an ordinary person in minutes. But by the end, they only made me weak for a while, and I could keep fighting through it. I guess I forgot about that. She turned to Kurama and gave him a small smile before bowing her head slightly. I'll let the mother and me take over too much. I hope you can accept my apology. Kurama grunted, but gave her a slight nod before closing his eyes again, retreating back into his slumber. With that settled, Kushina no longer opposed the idea. Instead, she helped Naruto figure out how to extract the venom properly. She even pointed out some useful texts in the scroll storage, ones that detailed how to identify herbs and mushrooms that could complement or counteract toxins. From there, it was all trial and error. Gathering, mixing, testing reactions. None of it was particularly pretty, but it was necessary. Eventually, Naruto found what he was looking for. One day, while out hunting, a bear unexpectedly attacked him. He managed to coat his blade with a newly refined venom, and the results were fast. The beast went down before it could do any real damage. That was good enough for him. Nearly a year had passed, an entire year of peaceful training and quiet existence for Naruto and his companion. But for Itachi Uchiha, peace had been an illusion, an unattainable dream that eluded him at every turn. The ANBU captain had a problem. No, his family had a problem. Itachi couldn't understand his father or the Council of Elders. A coup against Konoha? The very idea was absurd. Yes, the Sharingan was powerful, but Hiruzen Sarutobi alone could decimate a large portion of their clan without breaking a sweat. Itachi shook his head. A coup now? His father had clearly lost his mind. If that were all there was to it, he wouldn't be sitting here grappling with the impossible, wondering if he could even save his family. Shursue's sacrifice had been their last hope for a peaceful resolution, but that hope had drowned with him in the Naka River. And now, not only did some within the clan believe that Itachi himself had murdered Shursue to gain power, but the true culprit behind his death had taken notice of the situation, tightening his grip, applying pressure. Danzo Shimura, the shadow of the village. Somehow, Danzo had managed to corner him today, delivering a grim ultimatum. The clan had to be wiped out. The only ones allowed to live were those who had no knowledge of the coup. The rest, his friends, his family, had to die. Itachi could not bring himself to kill them. Some among the Uchiha were contemptible, driven by arrogance and blind hatred. They saw themselves as superior to all others, and their actions reflected it. But there were others, peaceful Uchiha, those who had not yet been consumed by bitterness and resentment. Should he really slaughter them simply because they refused to stand up against the clan's leadership? Because they were too pacifistic to rebel? The buildup of chakra was sudden, but Itachi was already prepared before the space in front of him twisted and unraveled like an open wound. A masked figure stepped out from the vortex of swirling air. Itachi's kunai was in his hand in an instant, Sharingan blazing as he locked eyes with the intruder. A single, fully matured Sharingan stared back at him. "Who are you?" Itachi asked, his voice cold, betraying only the faintest hint of unease. He was in full ANBU mode now. The man's mask, an orange spiral pattern, tilted slightly as he regarded him. Then, in a deep, rumbling voice, he spoke. "Itachi Uchiha, former ANBU captain, the prodigy of your clan, and now, caught between a rock and a hard place." A pause. "I don't envy you, young Uchiha, but I, Madara Uchiha, can help you." Itachi took a measured step back. Madara Uchiha? The greatest traitor the clan had ever known. Or, in the eyes of some, its strongest warrior, the one who should have led them to domination over all others. Madara Deno. He infused his voice with a carefully measured awe, feigning reverence for a man believed to be long dead. But in the next breath, he reverted to his usual calm. "How would you be able to help me?" The masked man vanished, his form dissolving into another swirl of air, only to reappear behind Itachi in an instant. "Oh, I will help you cleanse our clan." Then just as suddenly, he was in front of him again. Itachi's senses remained sharp, his mind analyzing every move. He did not know this man's true strength, but instinct told him that despite his claims, he was not Madara Uchiha. And yet, he was strong, perhaps stronger than Itachi himself. That alone meant he had to be cautious, had to play along. The masked man continued, his voice thick with dark amusement. Tonight, we will meet. We will kill all who cannot be saved, those too weak to move forward. Our clan must be reborn. With you and your brother as its pillars, the Uchiha will surpass all others. Itachi remained impassive. He absorbed the words, his mind calculating, but something gnawed at him. Why had he agreed? He had sworn to himself that he would deal with this in his own way. And yet, here he was, accepting help to slaughter his entire clan. He shouldn't have. He knew that. But still, he listened as the masked man laid out his plan. And he nodded. This evening, Uchiha District. The bloodbath in the Uchiha District had begun minutes ago. Bodies fell in the moonlit streets, yet the massacre met little true resistance. This disappointed one man in particular, the masked ninja, the one who called himself Madara Uchiha. He made no effort to hide his dissatisfaction, lamenting the lack of a real challenge, mocking the weakness of those he cut down. Itachi, however, stayed true to his purpose. His blade sought only those who had been the most vocal about the coup. His partner showed no such restraint. Every Uchiha who crossed the masked man's path fell effortlessly, as if their Sharingan meant nothing. But for all of Itachi's composure, he struggled. His part of the district was the hardest, where his family lived, where the mother of the only person who still trusted him resided. And now, he stood before her, his ANBU sword frozen in place. Izumi's mother looked at him with a sad, knowing expression. I understand, Itachi. Do it. Her voice was steady, almost comforting. But tell me, shouldn't the ANBU have stopped this by now? A wry smile ghosted her lips. We were doomed the moment this night began. In a way, I'm relieved my little one isn't in the village right now. Itachi remained silent, his grip tightening on his blade. She chuckled softly. She liked you, you know. Still does. And she will believe me. Her eyes shimmered, the tomo in her Sharingan shifting, merging into a unique pattern. Itachi's breath caught as something within him, a mirror, a wall, a fragile piece of his soul, shattered. Her smile widened. I knew it. But it's too late now, isn't it? She sighed. You have to play your role, Itachi. Endure. Keep my eyes safe for my little girl, yes? Her Sharingan faded back to its normal state. Itachi wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but he never got the chance. In a blur of motion, the masked man appeared behind her. Before either of them could react, a black metal rod pierced through her back, protruding from her chest. Izumi's mother gasped, her breath hitching, blood dribbling from her lips. Itachi's mind reeled, but the cold, dispassionate voice of the masked man tore through his spiraling thoughts. I hope I won't have to pick up more of your slack, Itachi. The warning was laced with mockery. I would be most displeased if I had to reconsider who inherits my legacy. For a moment, rage surged within him, threatening to break free. But he swallowed it down, forced himself to remain calm. This wasn't the time. He couldn't afford to act rashly. Without another word, he stepped forward and, with a single clean stroke, ended the woman's suffering. As she slumped lifelessly, he carefully sealed away her head, his expression blank. He refused to look at the masked man again. Instead, he turned away and moved toward the next house. His parents' house. He had expected a fight, a struggle, resistance. He did not expect what awaited him. Inside, his father and mother knelt in the dimly lit room, serene, waiting for him. I will not fight you, son. Neither of us will, Fugaku said, his eyes remaining closed even as Itachi stepped forward, blood dripping from his blade onto the tatami floor. His ANBU uniform bore the scars of battle, but in this room, in this moment, he felt like a child again. Father, Itachi began, but Fugaku cut him off. There is no need. Without opening his eyes, he reached into his robes, retrieving a scroll and rolling it across the floor toward his son. I know we've been played, Itachi. His voice was steady, unshaken. Take this. It contains one of the clan's greatest treasures, the Sword of Tatsuka. It has always been wielded by the one who protects the Uchiha. A faint, almost imperceptible note of approval entered his tone. And in your own way, that is what you are doing now. Before Itachi could respond, his mother spoke. Sure Sui left a letter for us. Or rather, for me. Mikoto smiled softly, her eyes still closed. I was his favorite aunt, after all. She sighed. We knew there was no other way. You will protect your little brother, won't you? Itachi could only nod, speechless. But Mikoto wasn't finished. Something was wrong, you know? It took both of our powers to break through the hold, but we managed. She let out a quiet, humorless laugh. The so-called masters of Jinjutsu, outplayed by Jinjutsu themselves. What a disgrace. Fugaku coughed lightly, drawing their attention. Kodo, we don't have much time. He turned to Itachi. Sasuke will return from the training session I arranged any minute now. A pause. Then his tone softened. In the scroll I gave you, there is another, one containing our sealed eyes. Itachi's breath caught. You will need them, both of you. Fugaku's voice was firm. I know you've already awakened them. Train. Let no one know. And when the time comes, use mine. Your mother's will be for your brother. Itachi remained frozen. Now, Fugaku said gently, be quick. Protect our family, my son. Itachi's chest tightened. His mind screamed against what he had to do, but he had no choice. They had been prepared. They had accepted their fate. He lowered his blade, inhaled deeply, and in a swift, clean motion ended it. Meanwhile, at the entrance of the Uchiha district, a perfect replica of Itachi stood before Sasuke Uchiha, mirroring his every detail down to the cold intensity in his eyes. Across from him, Sasuke trembled, tears streaming down his face as his entire world collapsed around him. Why did you kill everyone, Nisan? His voice broke, pleading, desperate for an answer that would make sense. The imitation of Itachi, the masked man who called himself Madara, spoke with chilling precision, his voice an exact copy of the emotionless tone that had made Itachi so infamous among the ANBU. Because I wanted to see how strong I truly am. A dark chuckle followed, low and mocking. Do you understand now, my foolish little brother? I'm the strongest Uchiha. Do you seek vengeance? Do you wish to make our parents proud? Then hate me, despise me, grow stronger, seek me out, and if you think you have what it takes, kill me. His Sharingan glowed ominously in the moonlight. If you awaken the same eyes as mine. Sasuke could hardly comprehend what he was hearing. His brother's words were foreign, twisted, cruel. This wasn't the Itachi he knew, couldn't be. Why would he say such things? What did he mean by the same eyes? His unspoken question was answered when the false Itachi gave him the location of the hidden chamber beneath the Naka shrine. Then, without hesitation, the masked man cast a Jinjutsu. Sasuke's world shifted. In his mind, he found himself running through the empty streets of the Uchiha district, surrounded by silence, by death. Shadows flickered at the edges of his vision, leading him toward the one scene he could never escape. There, in the center of it all, was Itachi. He saw his brother's blade cutting down their parents, saw the blood spill onto the tatama floor, saw the cold, expressionless face of the only family he had left. The sight was too much. His young mind, unable to process the horror, did the only thing it could, shut down. His body collapsed onto the blood-stained floor, unconscious. A heavy silence filled the air. What have you done? The real Itachi's voice was low, filled with barely restrained fury as he knelt beside Sasuke. His hands hovered over his brother's small form, already weaving diagnostic chakra into him, scanning for damage. The masked man stood over them, having returned to his true form, his single Sharingan gleaming from behind his swirling mask. Remember your orders, Itachi. His voice was ice, calculated, indifferent, and then a pulse of killing intent radiated from him, so overwhelming that even Itachi, hardened by years of ANBU experience, had to fight to steady his breath. As we discussed, meet me at the abandoned outpost. I will help you reach your true potential. His voice lowered. Don't keep me waiting. Then, without another word, he was gone, sucked into a vortex of spiraling space. Itachi stared at the spot where he had stood, jaw clenched. Slowly, he turned his gaze back to Sasuke, brushing a strand of dark hair from his unconscious brother's face. His fingers curled into a fist. He had made a decision. Lifting Sasuke into his arms, he turned and vanished into the night, moving with silent urgency toward the Hokage Tower. He needed answers. He needed to know exactly what had been done to his brother. And no matter how long it took, he would get his revenge for whatever that masked man had done to Sasuke. Shortly after the start of the massacre, Mindscape of Naruto, Kurama focused his immense will bent toward a delicate task, reshaping his host's chakra system from within. Even under normal circumstances, such a feat was nearly impossible. With the seal constraining him, it was an even greater challenge. But he was the Kyuubi no Kitsune. If anyone could accomplish the impossible, it was him. He had a strong feeling that the brat would need every ace up his sleeve in the coming days. Good. He had found it. The residual chakra slumbering deep within Naruto's blood. Without it, what he was attempting would have been outright impossible. Months of careful work had already yielded results. He had successfully granted his host an additional chakra affinity. Now, he was reinforcing Naruto's system, altering the very foundations of his chakra flow with precise adjustments. As he prepared to stimulate a specific array of tenketsu, guiding them to grow in a particular way, something shattered his concentration. A surge of emotion, despair, sorrow. It flooded from his host, raw and overwhelming. Kurama's focus wavered, and with a low growl of irritation, he allowed his awareness to follow the disturbance out of the mindscape. His vision settled on the boy, Naruto, sitting in meditation, his small frame trembling. Tears had begun to well in the child's eyes. Naruto, in his training, had honed his mind's eye of the Kagura to an astonishing degree. Just now, for the first time, he had extended his senses far enough to encompass the entirety of Konoha. The rush of awareness had been exhilarating, until it wasn't. Because with his newfound perception, he had borne witness to the Uchiha massacre. The pain, the anguish, the countless fading life forces, it had all unfolded before him in excruciating detail. The boy gasped, his breath shaky as he opened his eyes. A faint, slitted red gleam flickered within them. He turned toward the village, ready to run, ready to act. Before he could move, a deep growl stopped him. Raitaro stood firm, his dark fur bristling, blocking Naruto's path with an unyielding stance. "Let me go, Raitaro," Naruto pleaded, his voice raw with emotion. I need to help them. They're dying." His whole body shook with the weight of the lives slipping away from his reach. Kurama's voice rumbled through his mind, firm but not unkind. "I know it's hard, but you cannot be seen. I've told you before, until you master synchronization with me, those Uchiha could control you." As if sensing the fox's words, Raitaro barked in agreement, his piercing gaze locking onto Naruto. Naruto clenched his fists, his breathing ragged. The chakra that had once allowed him to sense the massacre had faded now, leaving only a gnawing, empty feeling in his gut. But the knowledge remained. He knew what was happening down there. And yet, nobody was stopping it. Nobody was helping them. His heart pounded as rage coiled in his chest. Why? Why weren't the ANBU intervening? Why was the Hokage allowing this to happen? "What did I tell you, Naruto?" Kurama's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts before they could plunge too deeply into darkness. Naruto swallowed hard. His throat felt tight while rising in his stomach. "That," his voice wavered. Raitaro barked again, softer this time, as if urging him forward. Naruto exhaled shakily, forcing the words out. that there can't be light without darkness, that some people can be saved and some can't. His fists clenched in his lap, that some are so rotten they just want to spread their poison. Exactly. Kurama's tone was calm but firm. Not every Uchiha was bad, but many had grown too proud of their so-called divine eyes. You saw how the Uchiha police turn a blind eye to crimes they deemed beneath them, didn't you? Naruto flinched at the memory. I know this is difficult, but you cannot go to the village now. The fox's voice softened. Soon, you'll have the answers you seek. For now, come into the mindscape. Speak with your mother. Naruto wiped at his tear-streaked face, his breath still shaky, but the storm within him slowly settled. Raitaro pressed against him, warm and reassuring, his tail curling around Naruto's back. The boy hesitated for only a moment before closing his eyes again, allowing himself to slip into the depths of his mindscape. Some days later, outskirts of Konoha. It took many long conversations with his mother and Kurama, along with some much-needed cuddles with Raitaro, before Naruto finally began to shake off the lingering weight of the Uchiha massacre. The images still haunted him, and his chakra remained turbulent, making his usual control exercises frustratingly unreliable. But Kurama reassured him that it would pass. For now, Naruto focused on the next best thing, archery. Leaving the safety of the Uzumaki temple, he made his way into the forest, his bow slung across his back and a fresh set of arrows secured at his side. Moving through the trees had become second nature to him. His body carried him effortlessly across the branches as he headed toward his usual training ground, a secluded area near one of the village's dead drop box used for anonymous communication. Once he arrived, he wasted no time, beginning with his routine warm-up exercises before shifting to more focused practice. Part of his training involved something he had recently learned about in one of his scrolls: dope work, data of previous engagements. It was a system designed to gather precise measurements on trajectory and aiming adjustments based on various distances. He had developed a methodical approach. First, he marked a fixed position as a shooting spot. Then, he either carved targets into trees or strung up makeshift ones using rope. With careful precision, he measured the distances to each target, ensuring that every shot contributed to his growing mental database. Then he began. Knock, draw, hold, aim, release. Each step was repeated with methodical precision, over and over, refining his movements, adjusting the angle of his shots, correcting minor inconsistencies. As his muscles grew accustomed to the motions, he started experimenting with his chakra flow. Channeling chakra to his back increased his stability, allowing him to hold the draw for longer periods. Directing it to his eyes enhanced his vision, making distant targets clearer and sharper. These small adjustments not only improved his technique, but also served another purpose, helping him regain control over his chakra after the emotional turmoil of the past few days. The rhythmic twang of his bowstring and the satisfying thud of arrows embedding into it filled the forest. Raitaro had gone off to hunt, leaving Naruto alone with his thoughts and his training. The isolation didn't bother him. If anything, it was grounding. The world beyond this clearing felt distant, muffled. But that peace didn't last. Suddenly, one of his detection seals flared to life. Instantly, Naruto froze, body tensing. His heartbeat remained steady, but his senses sharpened. The seal hadn't been tripped by an animal. It was a person. Someone had wandered into this secluded part of the forest. Friend or foe? Naruto took a slow, measured breath, drawing his focus inward. Extending his sensory abilities, he reached out with his mind's eye of the Kagura, stretching his awareness toward the unknown presence. Every detail mattered: their chakra signature, their movement, their intent. Who had found their way into his training ground? Outskirts of Konoha, remote clearing. One lone ANBU had made her way deep into the forest, seeking solitude. Izumi, formerly Izumi Uchiha, no longer carried her clan name. Now and only two other Uchiha remained. One, the man blamed for the massacre. The other, his younger brother. There had been a time when she had admired Itachi, perhaps even harbored feelings for him. But that was a lifetime ago. The girl who had worn the Uchiha name was gone, buried beneath the mask of an ANBU operative. Her clan was dead, and so was she, at least according to the records. For the official reports, Izumi Uchiha had perished on her last mission. She had received the message from the Hokage himself, an encrypted order unlike any before, to fake her death. That alone had been enough to raise suspicion, but nothing could have prepared her for the full briefing that followed. The Uchiha had planned a coup. The village had prepared to act, and in the end, Itachi had shown his true colors, slaughtering every single member of their clan, sparing only his younger brother. A bitter pill to swallow. Hiruzan Sarutobi had given her leave, allowing her time to process the impossible. He trusted her to find her own path forward. How touching. But what path was there left for her? She had no family to return to, no life beyond the ANBU. And as much as she wanted to seek out Sasuke, she knew she couldn't. Itachi had made it clear to the Hokage. Anyone who posed a potential threat to his little brother would be eliminated. The world of light had been stripped from her. All that remained were the shadows. A part of her had always known that answering the call to ANBU would change her life forever. She just hadn't realized how much. Maybe her assignment had saved her. Had she been in the village, would Itachi have spared her? Or would he have cut her down like all the others? A sliver of relief stirred within her, but it was fleeting. Was she really alive, or had she simply been left behind? That was why she had come here. The village, with its familiar streets and memories, had been suffocating. Here, in the quiet of nature, she could breathe, could try to understand what came next. Not that she had found any answers. Her leave would last until she deemed herself fit to return. When that would be, she had no idea. Physically, she was fine, perhaps a little drained, but nothing rest wouldn't fix. Mentally, however, that was another story. Everything felt surreal. She had been so lost in thought that she never noticed Naruto Uzumaki sneaking up on her. Naruto had sensed her long before he saw her. The masked figure was an ANBU, that much was clear. Their chakra signature felt familiar, one of those who regularly checked the dead drop box nearby. He hesitated for a moment before lowering his bow and slipping into the shadows, masking his presence as best as he could. Then, in a measured tone, he called out, "ANBU-san, you're a little off schedule. Is there a problem in the village? Does the Hokage need to talk?" Izumi stiffened, her muscles tensing in surprise. He had snuck up on her. Not only that, but she couldn't pinpoint his exact location. A child had managed to evade her senses. A trained ANBU operative. That was unsettling. She kept her voice neutral, but projected it across the trees, uncertain of where he was listening from. "And you are far from your burrow, little wolf." She was the only one who called him that. Others in ANBU referred to him as the monk, a nickname she never quite understood. He was too mischievous, too full of life for such a solemn title. She had watched him in the past, noted the way he explored with that wolf cub of his. At first, he had been easy to track, but over time, he had become more elusive, more careful, to the point where she would have needed to actively hunt him down using serious skill, and the Hokage had made it very clear that Naruto was off limits. The boy's response came from somewhere unseen, his voice calm but wary. "Be that as it may, ANBU-san, why are you here? As far as I know, this sector was declared off limits to most of you by the old man, right?" A pause. "So, that leaves two possibilities. One, you got lost. No big deal. Maybe you can even tell me what happened in the village a few days ago." His voice hardened, his tone losing the warmth of childhood. "Or you've gone rogue. And if that's the case, I'll have to ask a friend to deal with you." The way he said it, so calm, so steady, sent a shiver down Izumi's spine. There was something ancient in his voice. Not his words, but his presence. It felt eerily similar to Kurama. A slow chuckle left her lips, though it carried a bitter edge. Bold little wolf, but not in a bad way. She sighed, shaking her head. No, I got lost. I was looking for a place to mourn, if I'm being honest. She wasn't sure why she was telling him this. Maybe because there was no point in lying. Maybe because she needed to say it out loud. A few days ago, an incident in the village took everything from me. My clan, my home, my identity. Everyone I knew gone. She let out a weak laugh, her voice laced with exhaustion. And now I'm standing here, spilling village secrets to another village secret. To a little boy, no less. I really should go see Yamanaka. Naruto was silent for a moment. Then, slowly, he emerged from the shadows. Izumi watched as he approached, his expression different now, softer, more understanding. I knew it, he murmured. His voice was quiet, pained. It felt terrible, feeling all those flames flicker and then go out. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. Izumi's throat tightened. Even with her mask concealing her face, she nodded. Then, before she could say another word, Naruto bent down, picking up a fallen branch. Izumi tilted her head in mild confusion as the wood shifted in his hands, transforming into a small, simple boat. Wordlessly, he held it out to her. It's missing the candle and paper, but there's a river about 10 minutes that way. Maybe. His voice wavered, breaking slightly. Izumi stared at the tiny wooden boat in her hands, something inside her cracking just a little more. In the mindscape of Naruto, Kushina's eyes widened as she stared at the scene unfolding in front of her on something akin to a television screen. Did my cute little son just use Mokutan? Her voice wavered between disbelief and barely restrained excitement. She turned sharply, her gaze locking onto the massive fox lounging smugly within his cage, his tails flicking lazily behind him. Kurama looked particularly pleased with himself. Smug didn't even begin to cover it. Kushina's brow twitched. She knew that look. Marching up to the bars, hands on her hips, she glared at him. What did you do? The great Kyuubi cracked open one massive, crimson eye, stretching out as if he had just woken from a particularly satisfying nap. His grin was all fangs and arrogance. Finishing a project of mine. The way he said it, so casual, so self-satisfied, sent a spark of irritation through Kushina's veins. Her nostrils flared. Kurama. The fox let out a deep chuckle, shifting slightly, but making no effort to explain himself further. Kushina's eye twitched. She had the distinct feeling she was about to strangle a giant, smug-tailed bastard. Izumi was still at a loss for words as she took the small wooden boat into her hands. She studied its simple yet precise design, then looked back at Naruto, who was frowning. Was that intrusive of me? He asked, bowing deeply. I apologize. His reaction only added to Izumi's growing list of questions. She shook herself out of her thoughts when she noticed that Naruto hadn't stopped bowing. No, it's fine, Naruto, she said quickly. Thank you. I'm just shocked that you did what you did. She spoke slowly, still trying to process everything. It was one thing to grapple with the surreal nature of the situation, but now the boy, who was regarded as the village's greatest weapon, had grown even more formidable. And all because he had somehow manifested a bloodline thought to have died with the village's founder. I mean, do you realize what you just did? She asked, drawing his attention to the boat he had crafted. Naruto blinked at her, tilting his head. What I did? You mean the boat? Isn't it tradition to help guide souls safely into the Shinigami's embrace? His tone was casual, as if he saw nothing unusual about it. Meanwhile, in his mindscape, Kurama let out a snort at Kushina's teary-eyed reaction. Hadn't she once raved about how amazing the show dame's jutsu was? And yet Naruto remained utterly oblivious to the significance of what he had just done. Yes, you're right, that is how it's done, Izumi acknowledged. But what I was referring to was your ability to create something like this. She held up the wooden boat in her palm, studying it. You didn't just carve this, Naruto. You grew it. You made the wood branch out and take shape. That is one of the rarest abilities Konoha has ever known. The power of the first Hokage, Senju Hashirama. Even the trees around us are said to be remnants of his jutsu. Naruto furrowed his brow, considering her words. After a moment, his face lit up in realization, and he smiled. That makes sense, he said. It felt like the wood wanted my chakra, like it was responding to me. But honestly, it was more like someone else was doing it. I just imagined what I wanted it to look like, thought about how cool it would be, and, well, both. He scratched the back of his head, looking sheepish. Izumi blinked behind her mask. That was certainly not how most bloodline abilities worked. Could you try it again? She asked cautiously. Then, noticing the way Naruto looked at her, like she had just told him his gift wasn't good enough, she quickly added, I mean, maybe you should have a boat for yourself as well. Naruto seemed to consider that before nodding. He picked up another branch from the ground, closed his eyes, and focused. His brow furrowed in deep concentration, but after a long pause, nothing happened. He opened his eyes and looked up at Izumi with a frustrated, almost guilty expression before shaking his head. It's there, he murmured, but I can't quite get it this time. Izumi watched him closely. So he did have the ability, but it wasn't fully under his control yet. That likely meant he would need to train before he could wield it intentionally. This was something she should report to the Hokage. But then again, she was technically on leave. There was no rush, was there? After that little moment of excitement, the two of them sat together and simply talked. Nothing more. Izumi eventually used the boat as intended, setting it adrift with silent prayers for her mother, hoping she had not met too cruel an end. She thanked Naruto for listening before heading home. Tomorrow, she would take up the offer for a mind-healing session with the Yamanaka. And maybe after that, she would finally report Naruto's newfound ability to the Hokage. 2 days later, Naruto's mindscape. For Naruto, after his first excited conversation with his mother, a new challenge was added to his ever-growing list of training goals. Unfortunately, while Kurama had managed to awaken his dormant bloodline with some careful nudging, something the fox was quite pleased with, there was little to no guidance on how to develop it further. Not a single scroll in the temple contained instructions for wood release. There were only brief mentions from Lady Mito, but nothing substantial to work with. With no clear path to mastering the elusive ability, Naruto decided to focus on something else, something he was close to perfecting: the Uzumaki sealing chains. All right, you managed to summon the chains without any hand seals just yesterday, Kushina noted with a proud smile. Even faster than your mother. Very well done, Naruto-kun. She beamed at him before her expression turned serious. But after that little surprise with the wood release, I remembered something. Some of the Uzumaki had a rare ability, one that only a few ever managed to achieve. They could use the chains as a base to create something permanent. It was said that Ashina Uzumaki could forge his own sword from nothing. Kurama's ears twitched, and he cracked open a single eye. That wouldn't surprise me, the fox muttered. But the fact that only a handful of you meatbags ever achieved it isn't surprising either. Kushina shot Kurama a surprised look while Naruto perked up. Really? Why is that, Kurama? He asked, eyes wide with curiosity. The great fox smirked, his voice laced with amusement. Because creating something from chakra alone is a skill that only those who truly understand Ninshu can master. Naruto's brows furrowed as he thought about that. Wait, we've gone over Ninshu plenty of times. Ninshu teaches that chakra is in everything around us. Chakra gives life. He trailed off, scratching his head. Kurama's expression briefly flickered with surprise, so the brat had actually been listening to his lectures. Not bad, Naruto, the fox praised. What you're looking for is something that most humans have long since forgotten. Besides the basic 5 elements, there are 2 fundamental forces of chakra. Even Kushina, usually quick to huff at Kurama's arrogance, listened intently. Most people only focus on elemental affinities, but true scholars of chakra understand the 2 primordial forces: Intan, yin release, and its counterpart, Yotan, yang release. The Uzumaki clan, in particular, are naturally gifted with powerful vitality. Kurama paused, his piercing gaze locking onto Naruto. What do you think that comes from? Naruto thought back to his lessons, piecing together the information. After a moment, he nodded to himself. They have a strong yang affinity, right? Kurama opened both eyes fully and sat upright, his tails curling around him. Well done again. There might be hope for you yet, Ninjen. He chuckled, earning an indignant hey from Naruto. Then, turning to Kushina, he continued, think back to what your scrolls say about Ashina Uzumaki. What made him unique? Kushina frowned, trying to recall. Naruto, eager to help, started throwing out wild guesses, including the completely unacceptable notion that Ashina might not have liked ramen. The very idea was blasphemous. But then, realization dawned on Kushina's face. He was a scholar. Some even called him the priest of seals. Wait, her eyes widened. He meditated every single day. Kurama nodded. Exactly. And done correctly, meditation doesn't just connect you to nature, it strengthens yin release. Only those who master both yin and yang and achieve balance can unlock the path to yin-yang release. He turned to Naruto. Only then will you be able to create something that lasts even after your chakra is no longer connected to it. Naruto frowned, looking a little put out. Kushina seemed equally perplexed. Wait, I don't think any of us were ever on the same level as the Sage of Six Paths, she pointed out. How did Ashina manage it then? Kurama huffed, a smug smile tugging at his lips. Because they weren't. Two identical expressions of shock met him. The fox smirked at their reaction. They just brute forced their way through, creating a pale imitation of the real thing. And they overlooked a critical step. He paused, savoring their anticipation before finally revealing it. They never connected to nature itself. True yin-yang release can only be achieved as a sage. Then, with a flick of his tail, he shifted gears. But back to the matter at hand, Naruto. The boy blinked and straightened. Air. Yes. Kurama regarded him with a surprisingly fond look. This path Naruto was on. It made things much easier for the fox to bear. Remember the meditation technique I taught you. Combine it with the chakra flow you experience when using the sealing chains. You need a clear visualization and firm intent. Use your morning meditation session to try. But be careful. The first time you succeed, you'll feel a significant drain. Don't be afraid of it. I'll help manage the worst of it, but you need to stay in the proper state of mind while training. Understood. Naruto nodded slowly, still deep in thought. With that, the conversation drifted into more casual small talk between mother and son, which was Kurama's cue to slip back into sleep. The next morning, Naruto did as instructed. The moment he succeeded, he felt the drain. It was intense, almost like losing more than half his reserves. But there, in his hands, was the result of his effort. A crude, clunky imitation of a kunai, yet it shimmered with an adamantine sheen. Raitaro sniffed it curiously before giving Naruto a nudge with his snout. 2 small barks. Another thing to practice. Yay! With this newfound ability to create small chunks of chakra metal, Naruto decided to experiment with different weapons. If he could forge them himself like Ashina, it changed everything. He loved his bow. It allowed him to strike from a distance, keeping him safe while hunting his prey. But he knew there would come a time when he would have to face the world head-on. Other shinobi might detect him. Some would have defenses against projectiles. Some were simply too fast to be caught by an arrow. His teachers refused to let him have a disadvantage in close combat. He trained in the open palm taijutsu style his mother had taught him. But what if his opponents had blades? Seals could only bridge the gap so much. This led Naruto to the Uzumaki armory. He had high hopes, dreams of wielding a sleek, deadly katana. But reality was cruel. He quickly learned that large swords were impractical for a shinobi trained in agility and precision. Or to be more precise for him, they just didn't feel right. Not one to give up easily, he tried every weapon store in the armory. But as he reached the end of his options, frustration gnawed at him. Sensing his mood, Raitaro distracted him by nudging the bingo book Naruto had requested in his last letter to the Hokage. Flipping through it, Naruto stumbled upon a potential solution. Asuma Saratobi, his trench knives. Intrigued, Naruto carved wooden dummies to test the feel of different weapon designs. But the trench knives' transition from taijutsu felt clumsy. He needed something smaller, something more natural. The answer came unexpectedly during a hunting trip. He watched as Raitaro pounced on a target, his claws slicing through it effortlessly. Claws. Naruto searched through weapon scrolls, but found most claw designs too bulky. It took weeks before he found inspiration in an unexpected place, an agricultural text. Farmers in rice fields used a curved blade for harvesting. Excited, Naruto carved another wooden model, adding a finger ring for better grip. When he held it in a reverse grip, it felt right. A karambit, shorter reach than a kunai, but with a well-placed wind chakra edge, it would be lethal. It was small, easy to conceal, and its curved shape made it nearly impossible to block. If he infused it with seals and his chakra metal technique, he could craft something truly formidable. Now, he just had to make 2 perfect ones. That wouldn't take long, right? 3 years later, Naruto wiped the sweat from his forehead, exhaling deeply. Finally, after all this time, he had done it. A solid, fully formed karambit, created purely from his chakra. It had taken years to refine all the techniques needed to make it happen, mastering the fundamentals, shaping the blade, and, most importantly, ensuring its durability. Now, at last, he had his own personalized weapon. He had integrated sealing techniques into it, allowing him to recall the blade at will or store it within the hidden seals on his wrists. With the markings completely invisible, the karambits were always within reach, concealed yet ever present. Through further experimentation, he had also added specialized seals to the blade itself, one that could disable or activate the edges at will, making it safer for training, and another that reinforced its structure, rendering it nearly unbreakable. What made the process so arduous was his insistence on creating a material even stronger than standard chakra steel. He had spent countless hours experimenting with the right level of chakra saturation, pushing the limits of durability. To truly grasp this, he had first needed to learn the fundamentals of blacksmithing, a process that took him an entire year to complete. Of course, he hadn't put his chakra-based metallurgy training on hold during that time. Instead, he used it as a means to refine his chakra control and manage his massive reserves. He had also discovered an interesting property of his self-forged metal. It could be melted and reshaped like regular steel, though doing so required an extremely high temperature. Alternatively, with a precise application of chakra, he could break it down into small, condensed pellets, which he then sealed away for later use. His curiosity had been piqued when he learned about a branch of chakra-based blacksmithing techniques. Perhaps exploring that further would help him unlock new ways to manipulate his unique metal. But that wasn't the only advancement he had made over the past 3 years. Naruto had also applied his recall seals to his arrows, linking them directly to a storage seal on his arm. With this, he had eliminated the need for a traditional quiver. No arrows jostling around, no risk of losing them, and nothing protruding from his back that could get snagged in combat. It was a sleek, efficient system. He looked down at his karambit, a small smile forming on his lips. It was a symbol of his progress, of his relentless perseverance. But then reality settled in. He still needed to forge at least one more. A problem for future Naruto. For now, he decided to reward himself. A quick glance at his supplies in the temple confirmed that he was running low on some essentials anyway. That settled it. He was heading into the village for a well-deserved bowl of ramen. After last year's discussion with the Hokage, they had mutually agreed to discontinue the ANBU supply drops. Instead, Naruto kept in regular contact through letters delivered by ravens and, occasionally, met with Hiruzen in person. These meetings, however, required discretion. Naruto's skill with the transformation jutsu had left even Hiruzen baffled. Unlike a typical Jinjutsu transformation, which could be dispelled with physical contact, Naruto's version was a full-body, physical alteration. As long as he continued channeling chakra, the transformation remained intact, shifting his very form rather than merely projecting an illusion. His chosen disguise? A teenage boy with black hair, Kosuke Saratobi, an identity and appearance given to him by the old man himself. The benefits were twofold. Under this persona, he could move freely in the village, purchasing supplies without raising suspicion. As a relative of the Saratobi clan, he even enjoyed a small clan discount. More importantly, it provided a convenient cover for his occasional meetings with Hiruzen. Slipping into his Kosuke persona, Naruto donned his usual outfit and gave Raitaro, a now nearly fully grown wolf, a quick pat. The wolf yawned before shaking out his fur, ready to accompany him. Their destination was already set, Ichiraku Ramen. Maybe he'd do some grocery shopping afterward, but first? Ramen. Ichiraku Ramen. Naruto slurped up another mouthful of ramen, momentarily lost in pure bliss. No matter how hard he tried, he could never replicate this masterpiece with his own cooking skills. Ichiraku Ramen remained unmatched. Beside him, Raitaro lay sprawled outside the ramen stand, his belly full and his body dangerously close to slipping into a food-induced coma. The large wolf had taken his own bowl outside, preferring to eat under the open sky. His ears twitched lazily as he soaked in the warmth of the sun, until suddenly they perked up in alertness. A group was approaching. One human female, 3 canines. Raitaro's eyes cracked open, his body tensing slightly as he observed the newcomers. The 3 dogs halted abruptly, noses raised as they sniffed the air. Their muscles coiled with sudden tension, eyes narrowing at the unfamiliar scent. Hana Inuzuka, walking alongside them, immediately noticed their reaction. She furrowed her brows and instinctively took a deep breath, trying to pick up whatever had unsettled them. But the thick aroma of ramen overwhelmed her senses, making it difficult to discern anything specific. Inside the stand, Naruto remained oblivious, still engrossed in his meal. But Raitaro had shifted from blissful food coma to sharp alertness, his body coiled and ready for any potential threat. The triplets let out a low growl, their fangs baring in challenge. Though young, they were still trained ninkin, and the presence of a wolf, especially one that was noticeably larger than them, was not something they would overlook. Hana followed their gaze, her eyes landing on the lone wolf sitting by the ramen stand, an empty bowl at his side. Her expression hardened. "Who are you?" she asked, her tone edged with caution. The triplets' growls deepened, their hackles raised. Raitaro slowly rose to his feet. Small sparks of electricity crackled through his thick gray fur, dancing along his frame in warning. He exuded a quiet but undeniable killing intent. Not overwhelming, but precise, focused. Hana felt the weight of it immediately, a shiver running down her spine. But the effect on the triplets was even more pronounced. Their growling ceased in an instant. Hana blinked in surprise. She turned her attention to her partners, confused by their sudden shift in demeanor. What had just happened? Before she could fully process it, another presence made itself known. A deep, commanding growl rumbled through the air, sending a ripple of tension through the group. A large, dark-furred canine stepped forward, Kuramaru. Hana stiffened at the sight of the battle-worn ninkin, the longtime partner of her mother, Tsum, and the respected head of the Inuzuka clan's pack. His imposing figure, complete with a distinctive eye patch and a missing left ear, was enough to silence any challenge before it began. The seasoned ninkin took one look at the standoff before speaking. "Stand down, you 3. His voice was rough, authoritative. His single eye locked on Raitaro. "You would lose." Hana swallowed. Kuramaru wasn't one to exaggerate. If he said that, he meant it. Kuramaru took another step forward, now level with Raitaro. Unlike the Inuzuka triplets, he was much closer to the wolf size. His stance was calm, but not without caution. "You're on my turf," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I hope you're not here to cause trouble." Raitaro met his gaze without flinching. His posture remained confident, tail erect, though small sparks of lightning still flickered along his fur. Then, in response, he bared his teeth slightly, not an aggression, but an acknowledgement, before giving a single, slow shake of his head. Kuramaru studied him for a moment, then exhaled through his nose, his expression shifting slightly into something almost thoughtful. "You can't speak yet." Raitaro gave another short shake of his head. The older Ninkin turned to Hana and the triplets. "Go ahead without me. Tell some I'll be a little late for dinner." Hana hesitated, glancing between the two large canines. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she knew better than to question Kuramaru when it came to matters of the pack. "Understood," she said finally, grabbing the triplets and leading them away. She cast one last look over her shoulder before disappearing down the street. Kuramaru turned back to Raitaro. His single eye gleamed with curiosity. "I think we should talk." Raitaro gave a firm nod before letting out a sharp bark, directing it toward the ramen stand. A moment later, Naruto peeked out, still holding his bowl of ramen, looking mildly surprised but not overly concerned. He glanced at the two canines, quickly assessing the situation, then gave Raitaro a thumbs up. "I'll wait for you at home then, buddy." Raitaro picked up his empty bowl and passed it to Naruto with a quick flick of his muzzle before turning back to Kuramaru. With a silent agreement between them, the two wolves disappeared in simultaneous shunshin. Streets of Konoha, sometime later. Naruto wandered through the narrow streets of Konoha, weaving his way through different districts, trying to get a feel for the village. While he liked the temple, the time was coming when he would need to move out, to integrate more, to meet people beyond his ever-loyal companion, Raitaro, the ANBU operative he occasionally interacted with, and the old man himself. If he wanted to fit in, he needed knowledge, familiarity with the village, its customs, and its people. He couldn't afford to be just another new face. He had already made several purchases for the temple, sealed them neatly into scrolls, and tucked them into his pouch. Now, he let his feet guide him as he moved through the streets, his thoughts lingering on the events at the ramen stand. Raitaro would be fine. Of that, Naruto had no doubt. The wolf was strong, more than capable of using jutsu, and had instincts honed sharper than any blade. Still, the encounter with Kuramaru had been interesting. Lost in thought, Naruto suddenly realized he no longer recognized his surroundings. The air was different here, heavy with the scent of sweat, cheap perfume, and something else he couldn't quite place. As his gaze flicked around, he caught sight of several women, dressed in revealing clothing, their expressions poised somewhere between inviting and calculating. The moment he made eye contact with one of them, she smirked, tilting her body just enough to emphasize her cleavage. Naruto swallowed. He had definitely taken a wrong turn. He had read about this place in scrolls and heard about it from his mother, but being here in person was something else entirely. No written word could capture the raw reality of Konoha's red light district. He found himself wondering why the Hokage allowed this place to exist. Sure, Konoha's version was far smaller than the infamous districts in the capital cities, but why did these places have to exist at all? Why did they have to be so filthy? His mother had once explained that the shinobi life was stressful and that, for some, engaging in physical pleasure without attachment was a way to alleviate that stress. But was that really all this was? Before he could lose himself in his thoughts, a door burst open nearby. A large, bald man stormed out, his face twisted in anger as he shouted back inside. "When I pay that much for everything, I expect everything. Not a screaming whore, because it hurts a little bit." Naruto barely had time to react before the man stalked off, the door slamming shut behind him. For a moment, the street was quiet. Then, minutes later, the door opened again. This time, a different man emerged, larger than the first, his muscles straining against his clothes. But he wasn't alone. He dragged a woman out onto the street, his fist tangled in her hair. Naruto stiffened. Her clothes were torn, barely hanging onto her body. Lace undergarments peeked through the shredded fabric, barely concealing her dignity. Her face was swollen, her skin blotched with bruises and cuts. She barely had the strength to resist as he shoved her against the wall, pressing a forearm against her throat. Then, without hesitation, he backhanded her across the face. Hard. If we lose that customer, the brute sneered, you'll lose more than money. I'll kill you brats one by one until you're compliant. The threat made her tremble, but she didn't beg. Naruto's jaw tightened. His fingers curled into fists. The people in the street did nothing. No one stepped in. This was normal here. That's why no one reacted. These discipline sessions usually happened behind closed doors, but things had escalated. This bastard was making an example out of her. Naruto's body moved on its own. His steps were measured, deliberate. His posture relaxed but coiled with potential energy. He appeared as nothing more than an older teenager, lean but athletic. To the brute, he probably didn't look like a threat at all. But that would change. His voice was calm. Let her go. No reaction. Naruto's eyes narrowed. A sliver of killing intent leaked into the air. His voice sharpened. I said let her go. That got his attention. The brute released the woman, letting her collapse onto the ground as he turned, eyeing Naruto with thinly veiled amusement. Then, after a beat of silence, he threw back his head and laughed. Oh, look at this, he sneered. Want to play with her? I'll give you a discount. Virgin like you won't last long, even with her like this. Naruto ignored him. He stepped past the brute, kneeling beside the woman. His voice was quiet but firm. Are you all right? Should I take you to the hospital? That was a mistake. The brute's face twisted in fury. He had been dismissed, ignored, and that only made him angrier. A baton appeared in his hand, and he stepped forward. You wanna di, Keat? Piss off. Now. Naruto finally looked at him, his blue eyes meeting the man's glare with eerie calm. I don't want to hurt you, he said simply, but I need to help her. If she doesn't get treated, she'll develop an infection. The baton slapped against the brute's palm. Thwack. I don't care. That bitch cost me good money today. He sneered. You think you could just walk in here and start making demands? Naruto exhaled. If money's the issue. He unsealed his pouch, pulling out a bursting full gamachan, and held it out. I'll pay. Just don't hurt her anymore. Get her to a doctor. The gathered crowd had grown. People were watching, but no one intervened. The brute's eyes widened at the wad of Ryu in Naruto's hand. Then he smirked. You'll hand that whole pouch over, he said, and piss off, or I'll kill you. Naruto blinked. Why would he give away Gamachan? That had been a gift from Jiraiya. You don't give away gifts. That wasn't done, right? By all hinged older appearance, he was still a child inside. So he shook his head. No, I won't do that. The brute swung the baton. Naruto dodged. A switch flipped inside him. Palm strikes didn't work. He wasn't strong enough. Jutsu was out of the question. So he adjusted. His karambits flashed into his hands, set to blunt mode. Small, fast, precise. He slipped into the man's guard, blade hooking behind his knee. The brute collapsed with a roar. Not for long. He forced himself back up. Naruto hopped back, both karambits out, held in reverse grip. His voice had lost all warmth. We can still end this without more violence. The brute spat. The only way this ends is with you dead. Naruto evaded each wild swing, watching, waiting. Then an opening. Naruto's kick struck low, brutal. The brute toppled like a felled tree. Naruto caught him mid-fall. The blade rested against his throat. Are you still an animal, or are you ready to talk? The man snarled. I'll kill why. A wet sound, a gurgle. The body hit the dirt. 3, 2, 1. An ANBU appeared. The Hokage wants to see you. Naruto nodded, sealed his weapons, and walked away. At the first quiet corner, they disappeared, a flock of ravens scattering into the night. That Naruto's conversation with Hiruzen after the incident in the red light district had been brief. The Hokage assured him there would be no consequences. He had clearly acted in self-defense. Still, the moment he had made the conscious decision to end a man's life stayed with him. It was a weight that lingered. When he arrived back at his usual hideout, Raitaro greeted him with a nod, offering him a piece of freshly hunted meat. The silent acknowledgement felt reassuring, as if his friend instinctively understood the turmoil in his mind and knew who he needed to speak with first. That night, Naruto retreated into his mindscape. There, he collapsed in Akushina's arms and wept. Though he had grown accustomed to blood and death through hunting, taking the life of a human was something entirely different. The warmth of his mother's embrace and the steady presence of Kurama anchored him, reminding him that he was not a monster. Kurama, self-proclaimed expert on the subject, had made his stance clear. Naruto's guilt alone was proof that he was not like the creatures he feared becoming. The following day, he received a summons from the Hokage for their usual tea appointment. This time, however, Hiruzen chose to host him at the Sarutobi residence, a small but telling detail. Naruto, using a well-crafted Sarutobi alias, appreciated the added security the change in location provided. Hiruzen had just finished pouring their tea when Naruto arrived, his sharp, analytical gaze never leaving the boy. As they each took a sip, the Hokage finally leaned back, lighting his pipe before speaking. Now, Naruto, let's start with the good news. Naruto, still maintaining his henge, immediately took note of the wording. The privacy seals in place were formidable, but the fact that Hiruzen was using his real name meant he had activated the highest level of protection. Your intervention led to the discovery of a human trafficking ring within our walls, Hiruzen continued, his voice heavy with the weight of the revelation. Since you essentially eliminated bandits, I will be registering this as a C-rank mission under your silent record. He handed Naruto a small scroll, the mission payment enclosed. Naruto's eyes widened slightly as he took it, before quickly sealing it away into his ammunition pouch. The not-so-good news, Hiruzen went on, exhaling a slow puff of smoke, is that our time is running out. Naruto's focus sharpened. By law, I can only freeze the funds of missing personnel for 10 years. You've been officially listed as missing for 6. That means I can only protect your parents' financial legacy for another 4 years before I am legally required to relinquish control. While the scrolls and artifacts have already been relocated to the temple for safekeeping, the monetary funds would default to the village's coffers, more specifically, into the hands of the elders. Naruto took a measured sip of his tea, processing the implications. So what you're saying is, I have 4 years before I have to step back into the light? Or do I? Hiruzen chuckled, a glint of approval in his aged eyes. Good. It seems my lessons on looking underneath the underneath are finally sticking. Naruto offered a small smile, but said nothing, waiting for the Hokage to continue. In truth, you wouldn't need to make a formal claim in front of the council. As long as there is official documentation proving your existence and active duty in Konoha, that would be enough. However, Hiruzen took another drag from his pipe, his expression growing more serious. Even that will attract unwanted attention. The moment we file your presence in the system, the bloodhounds will begin sniffing around, and it will only be a matter of time before you're forced into the open. I swore to your father, on his dying breath, that I would protect you. To uphold that promise, you need to be ready. Naruto remained silent for a moment, absorbing his words. He agreed. So how do we do this, Gigi? Hiruzen's smile returned. First, I have an ANBU operative who isn't mentally cleared for full duty yet. They primarily serve in my protection detail at the moment. I had someone else in mind, but that individual resigned just yesterday. However, you and this ANBU have already crossed paths before. I believe the two of you can work together, and perhaps the interaction will benefit you both. Naruto nodded. Sounds good to me. Training with Konoha's best can only help when I eventually have to step out of the shadows. Besides, his voice held a note of something deeper, something unspoken. I imagine there'll come a time when I won't want to hide anymore. Hiruzen exhaled another slow plume of smoke, nodding. Understandable, but I hope you realize that I'd sleep much better at night, knowing that when that time comes, you'll be fully prepared to handle the consequences of stepping back into the light. Naruto smirked slightly. Of course, Gigi. I do like being alive, you know. He chuckled, but the weight of their conversation still lingered in the air. That said, all the training in the world won't mean much without real-world experience. The Hokage's expression softened in approval. Naruto had always been bright. He had already completed the entire theoretical syllabus of the academy, albeit under an alias, and had his work graded by a trusted chunin. Exactly, Hiruzen agreed. That's why I plan to gradually integrate you with the current class of clan heirs once they graduate. He took another contemplative puff from his pipe, then smiled slightly. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. For now, your ANBU instructor will have full clearance to train you in our advanced facilities. And since you've already been blooded, I believe the occasional C-rank mission will help sharpen your skills further. Hiruzen's keen gaze settled on Naruto, watching carefully for his reaction. When the boy simply nodded in acceptance, the old man allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Yeah, that works, Naruto said. Then, after a brief pause, he leaned back and asked, Any news from my godfather? Hiruzen chuckled at the shift in conversation, allowing the tension to ease. They spent the next few hours talking about lighter topics before Naruto finally rose to leave. Tomorrow, he would meet his new instructor. Training would begin in the temple area for now, and he would take his next step toward the future that awaited him. The next day, if someone had asked Naruto what he hoped to gain from training with one of Konoha's elite, his answer would have been simple: strength. The kind of strength that would allow him to stand tall in the face of any challenge. Now, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and crimson, he could feel every single muscle in his body, even ones he hadn't known existed until recently. The ANBU with the Raven Mask had arrived early that morning. What followed were 6 grueling hours of relentless testing in the 3 fundamental ninja disciplines: taijutsu, ninjutsu, and genjutsu. The fact that he was still standing after all that was a minor miracle, considering his age. Though Raven made no comment, offering neither praise nor criticism, Naruto knew that a detailed report would be sent to Hiruzen by the end of the day. By his own estimate, his current abilities placed him solidly at a chunin level. Not bad for someone who had spent most of his life in the shadows. Now, however, they sat concealed in the thick branches of a tree, observing the class Hiruzen had mentioned. Their final lesson of the day was a chaotic, every man for himself taijutsu sparring match. It quickly became apparent that Sasuke Uchiha was the undisputed strongest among them. Naruto found himself nodding in approval. So, what's your assessment, Kosuke? Raven finally asked once the match had ended. Would you fit in with this class? Naruto took a quick sip from his water bottle before sealing it away and shaking his head. Don't think so, Raven-sensei. His voice held a note of certainty. First off, I don't think I'm cut out for a classroom learning environment. I learned the material because the old man motivated me, but after my relocation, he let out a short chuckle at the carefully chosen word. Well, let's just say I picked up skills that the academy could never have taught me. And as for the practical classes, let's be honest, I could wipe the floor with all of them. He leaned forward slightly, glancing at the now dispersing students. Did you see those so-called budding kunoichi? Half of them spent more time trailing after Uchiha-san like lost ducklings than actually sparring. Raven exhaled sharply, a hint of amusement laced in the sound. A disgrace. That's something I may have to report to the Hokage. Let's hope they get their act together before they leave the village for their first C-ranks. He shook his head. I don't envy their future Jonin instructors. With their observations complete, they returned to the temple, where they found Raitaro in a similar state of exhaustion. Neither of them knew exactly where he had disappeared earlier, but he had made sure the masked ANBU was trustworthy before leaving. The following weeks and months were dominated by training from sunrise to sunset. 5 days a week, Naruto sparred and studied under Raven's guidance. The remaining 2 days were left for independent training or much-needed rest. Per Kurama's advice, he refrained from revealing his bloodline abilities to Raven, for now. The Mokutan, in particular, would have to wait before he could dedicate time to mastering it. But he was making progress. Slowly, he could at least repair his bow and shape seals directly into the wood. As expected, missions soon followed. Most involved clearing out small bandit camps, but they were invaluable in honing his skills. 5 more successful missions were quietly added to his hidden record. One of his greatest gains, however, was the first jutsu Raven taught him, one that quickly became a favorite in his arsenal, the shadow clone technique. A forbidden jutsu developed by the second Hokage himself. Because Naruto couldn't create fewer than 20 standard clones despite his relatively decent chakra control, Hiruzen had authorized Raven to teach him the kenjutsu. Now, nearly 2 years since the training had begun, Naruto stood before the Hokage once more. "I am very pleased," Hiruzen said with a nod. "And yes, I authorize your request, Raven." Naruto, still going by his alias Kosuke, watched curiously as the Hokage turned to him. "Kosuke, your instructor has requested permission to begin your training in elemental jutsu." Hiruzen's tone was calm but firm. "Because you're not an officially registered shinobi of Konoha, there was some bureaucratic red tape, but that's been taken care of." He handed Naruto a storage scroll. Included inside is a list of jutsu for all 5 elements, as well as a pass granting you access to the shinobi section of the Konoha library. You may check out training scrolls as needed. The news was unexpected, but before Naruto could respond, Hiruzen continued. "Normally, Raven would oversee your training, but I need her back on full active duty for the foreseeable future." That caught both Naruto and Raven off guard. They exchanged a glance. Naruto's eyes filled with excitement for his mentor's return to duty, while Raven's held something more conflicted. She had grown accustomed to training the young wolf, and he wasn't so little anymore. A gentle bump from Naruto's elbow shook her from her thoughts. She exhaled before turning back to the Hokage. "Excuse me, Hokage-sama. I am grateful, but you are aware that with my condition, returning to full duty could worsen my state." Her voice was carefully measured, but for the more sensitive details, she switched to ANBU code. Hiruzen smiled knowingly. "I am aware. That is precisely why I have found a solution." Raven stiffened slightly, but didn't press further. Instead, she simply bowed in acceptance. Hiruzen then turned back to Naruto. "We will revisit your training and status in 1 year. For now, you have everything you need to refine your skills in your chosen path." He offered a sly wink before dismissing them both. As Naruto stepped out of the office, storage scroll in hand, he couldn't help but feel the shift in the air. His training with Raven had come to an end, but this was not the end of his journey. If anything, it was only the beginning. With Izumi, Raven. She sat in her private apartment within the ANBU headquarters, the one place where she could remove her mask and face herself without pretense. The dim glow of the lantern cast flickering shadows across the walls as she stood before her mirror. Her long brown hair, now tied into a high ponytail, framed the face of a woman hardened by years of duty. With a slow, steady breath, she activated her eyes. The familiar shift of crimson flooded her vision as her Sharingan awakened, the tomo spinning lazily before morphing into their matured form. A moment later, the unique pattern of her Mangekyo emerged, a 7-pointed star, subtly twisted clockwise, reflected in the mirror's surface. Her gaze dropped to the letter lying on her desk. At first, it seemed like an ordinary message, but as she blinked, the ink realigned itself, revealing a hidden storage matrix along with 2 simple sentences. She loved you deeply. Never forget what I told you the day before." Her breath hitched, fingers hesitating over the seal. With a flick of her wrist, she unsealed its contents. For a brief moment, all the weight on her shoulders seemed to lift. A quiet gasp escaped her lips, and before she even realized it, a small, genuine smile had formed. For the first time in a long while, she could see the light at the end of the tunnel. Quite literally, with Naruto in his mindscape. At the same time, another conversation took place. This conversation had no less serious. The news hit harder than anything Naruto had ever faced. He stood abruptly, emotions warring across his face, confusion, sorrow, and something deeper, something raw. His voice was unsteady when he finally spoke. "What do you mean it was never supposed to last this long?" Kushina sighed, her expression soft yet firm. "I know it's hard, son, but it was never meant to work for so long. And I can feel the pull growing stronger each day." She hesitated for a moment before continuing. "You know one of the fundamental rules the Uzumaki clan established." Naruto swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. And then, in perfect unison, mother and son spoke the words that had been ingrained in their bloodline for generations. "Never try to cheat the Shinigami." Kushina nodded solemnly. "Your father and I did this to give you a chance, to help you grow. And thanks to Kurama's help, I was able to stay longer than I ever should have." A bittersweet smile graced her lips, her eyes glistening. "I've watched you become everything we ever hoped for and more. When I see your father again on the other side, I can tell him, without a doubt, that our son has become a fine young man." Naruto glanced toward Kurama. The great fox, who had remained silent throughout the conversation, did not react, nor did he appear ready to offer any words of comfort. He simply watched. Naruto turned back to his mother, taking a deep breath before asking the question that took every ounce of his self-control to say without breaking. "When?" Kushina's heart clenched. She reached out and pulled him into a warm embrace, holding him close as if that alone could ease the pain. "I think I can hold on until the day you would have graduated from the academy." Her voice was gentle, but the weight of her words settled deep in Naruto's chest. "After that, I'll have to ask Kurama to stop the flow of chakra. If we push beyond that point, I imagine it will hurt too much." Naruto's arms tightened around her as his shoulders trembled. The sobs started softly, muffled against her shoulder. "We'll reduce training time while you're still here," he said between deep, shuddering breaths. It was the only thing he could control, the only way he could make sure their remaining time wasn't wasted. Kushina nodded, her hand running soothingly along his back. "Of course, sweetheart." Kurama watched silently. He had always known this moment would come. He had spoken with Kushina about it before. He had seen the way her presence had anchored Naruto, had steadied him when he teetered on the edge after his first kill. He was grateful she had managed to stay this long, even if it meant that saying goodbye would hurt that much more. Graduation day, 1 year later, evening. On the evening of graduation day, Naruto stepped into the Yamanaka flower shop, the small bell above the door chiming softly to announce his arrival. The scent of fresh blooms filled the air, a stark contrast to the heaviness that sat in his chest. His gaze wandered briefly over the vibrant array of flowers before settling on the counter, where a blonde girl sat idly polishing a Konoha headband. She hadn't noticed him enter, too lost in her own world as she mumbled to herself. "Now that I'm a kunoichi, Sasuke-kun will finally notice me. Oh, I hope we end up on the same team." Naruto barely reacted. He was dressed in black funeral attire, his posture composed yet distant. For this day, he had abandoned his usual hinge, leaving only his whisker marks hidden, just to see if anyone would recognize him as he was. Not that it mattered. Today, nothing like that mattered. The past 2 years had changed him. He had gained muscle, grown taller, and carried himself with the kind of quiet confidence that turned heads. His physique was lean but strong, his features sharp, his presence commanding in an almost unsettling way. Yet it was his expression, the cold weight behind his eyes, that truly set him apart. Even the flowers around him seemed to react, their delicate petals subtly wilting in the oppressive air of his mood. Still unnoticed, he tapped the bell on the counter, earning a sharp, annoyed response. "What?" Light green eyes met deep blue ones. "I need a funeral arrangement," Naruto said, his voice steady, measured. There was a flicker of something beneath the surface. Anger, grief, something unspoken, something already prepared. "It's for today." Yamanaka blinked, momentarily thrown off by the request, and by the person standing in front of her. He wasn't just any customer. He was striking in a way that was hard to place. His rough yet refined demeanor, the self-assured weight in his tone. It was the same kind of presence she admired in Sasuke. But there was something else, too. Something colder. Naruto cleared his throat, snapping her out of her daze. "Sorry," she said quickly. "Yes, we have something ready." She moved to retrieve a suitable arrangement, but found herself still speaking. "I just graduated today, you know." She wasn't sure why she was saying it, but her mouth kept moving before she could stop herself. Naruto raised a brow at her, the barest flicker of interest in his otherwise impassive expression. "Oh, really? That was it. Just 2 words. Flat, disinterested." Still, Ino pressed on, suddenly eager to fill the silence. "Yes, I was second in class standings, right behind Sakura. I'm sure I'll get a great Jonin instructor, and soon enough, I'll be at the top of the new genin." She puffed out her chest, clearly proud of herself. Naruto barely reacted. His eyes swept over the floral arrangements before pointing at one. "I'll take those." Ino, still expecting more of a response from him, handed him the bouquet and rang him up. Yet even as he took the flowers, she found herself staring, caught in the deep blue of his gaze. Something about him was frustratingly unreadable. Then, before she could even register what had happened, the flowers disappeared in a puff of smoke. Sealing jutsu. Wait, where was the scroll? Naruto had already turned to leave, but as he reached the door, he could still feel her gaze lingering on his back. With a glance over his shoulder, he met her eyes one last time. "If you want recognition or praise for your class standings, go to your parents," he said, his voice cool, almost dismissive. "Out there, it won't matter if you can recite the names of all the Kage from memory. What will matter is whether you're strong enough to survive an enemy encounter." His eyes narrowed slightly, calculating. "Maybe you should ask your mother what happens to a captured kunoichi." He paused, then let his gaze drift over her, as if reassessing. "Or better yet, looking at you. I'd say your father would have a better idea." He inclined his head slightly, a mockery of formal politeness, before turning away. The door shut behind him with finality. Ino stood there, utterly still, her mouth slightly open. For the first time in a long time, she had no response. She was speechless. Sometime later, Yamanaka residence. She sat at the grand feast her parents had arranged to celebrate her graduation. But no matter how much she tried to focus on the cheerful atmosphere, she couldn't shake the words of that blonde stranger from her mind. They lingered like a shadow, unsettling and persistent. By the time dessert was served, she couldn't hold it in any longer. Looking up from her plate, she hesitated before raising her voice. Daddy." Inoichi Yamanaka, still beaming with pride over his daughter's high marks, turned toward her with warmth in his eyes. "Yes, princess." She hesitated only for a moment before asking the question that had been weighing on her since that afternoon. "What happens if a kunoichi gets captured by the enemy?" The reaction was instant. The dining room, once filled with the hum of happy conversation, fell into silence. Inoichi's smile faded, his body stilling as his grip on his chopsticks tightened ever so slightly. Across from him, his wife lost her own hold on her utensils, the soft clatter against the table the only sound in the heavy stillness. Inoichi forced himself to remain calm, carefully schooling his expression into something gentler. He offered her a strained smile. "What brings that up, princess?" His measured tone was meant to keep the conversation light, but Ino caught the tension beneath it. Without thinking much about it, she launched into a retelling of her brief encounter at the flower shop, describing the blue-eyed boy who had spoken to her with such cold certainty. Inoichi listened, silent and thoughtful, cursing himself internally. Of course, that young man wasn't wrong. If anything, he had given Ino a lesson her own father had struggled to find the right time to teach. He had allowed her to indulge in her childhood fantasies, to chase her crush on Sasuke, to fixate on trivial things rather than the harsh reality of the world she was about to step into. He had let her diet recklessly to maintain a figure she thought would impress a boy, instead of encouraging her to strengthen her body to survive. He had coddled her too much. With a brief glance at his wife, he exhaled and began explaining. He kept his words soft, careful, but he did not lie. He told her what could happen if a kunoichi fell into enemy hands, the dangers she might face, the brutal truths of war and espionage. He chose his words gently, but the implications were there, and Ino, sharp as ever, understood them. By the time he finished, her face had gone pale. Even with his careful phrasing, the weight of his words settled heavily on her shoulders. She had always known, in some distant, abstract way, that being a ninja was dangerous, but she had never truly thought about what it meant to be weak. Her father's final warning echoed in her head. If your chakra reserves run low and you can no longer use your jutsu to evade the enemy, the only thing standing between you and capture is your physical condition. It was like a cold shower dousing her illusions. She liked Sasuke. She liked the idea of romance, of being swept off her feet, but being taken against her will because she was too weak to fight back? That was not happening. Her hands clenched into fists on her lap, and her expression hardened with newfound determination. "Daddy!" Inoichi's gaze sharpened, immediately picking up on the shift in her body language. He didn't need to be a Yamanaka specialist to know what was coming. "Yes, princess. Can we increase my training?" She hesitated, her voice softer than she wanted it to be, but the resolve in her eyes didn't waver. "Maybe include more physical conditioning too?" A faint blush dusted her cheeks, but Inoichi was too relieved to tease her about it. This was what he had been waiting for, the moment she would realize the truth on her own, without him having to push her. He had known this conversation needed to happen, but he had struggled with when and how. Now, thanks to a certain nameless boy, she had asked him. "Of course we can do that, Ino-chan." His voice was warm, proud, though I may have to consult a colleague for help. Training a kunoichi differs slightly from how I was trained, so I'd prefer to get some outside expertise. Would that be all right with you? Ino nodded firmly. Inoichi smiled, a deep sense of relief washing over him. This wasn't just about her development as a kunoichi, it was about ensuring she had the strength to survive in the world she was about to enter. And for the first time in a long while, he knew he'd be able to sleep a little easier at night. With Naruto at the Uzumaki Temple. Naruto stood in the quiet clearing before the memorial stone, the air heavy with the scent of earth and candle wax. The names of his parents, newly inscribed by his own hand that very morning, gleamed faintly in the flickering candlelight. At the base of the stone, he carefully placed the funeral arrangement he had bought from the Yamanaka flower shop, its delicate petals contrasting against the cold, unyielding surface of the monument. Beside him, Raitaro let out a low, mournful howl before pressing against his side, offering silent comfort. Naruto exhaled slowly, his hand resting on the wolf's thick fur. Even though he had known this day would come, had spent a full year preparing for it, nothing could have truly braced him for the moment Kushina finally let go. The ache in his chest was sharp and unrelenting. Now, standing before the stone, he clasped his hands together and bowed his head. "Watch over me, will you?" The unspoken prayer lingered in the still evening air. He turned his gaze to Raitaro, grateful for the steadfast presence of his companion. "Can you handle the hunt tonight, Rai?" he asked quietly. The wolf gave him a slow, understanding nod before slipping away into the shadows, leaving Naruto alone in the dim light of the candles. With a heavy breath, he walked to his usual spot, just outside the temple barrier, and sat down to meditate. His emotions churned within him, raw and unresolved. He needed to center himself, to regain the control that felt so fragile in the wake of his mother's passing. As the sun dipped below the horizon, evening bled into night. The once gentle silence of the forest felt different now, charged, unsettled. Naruto's eyes snapped open. Something was wrong. His senses sharpened instantly, his pulse steady but alert. There was movement in the village. Multiple chakra signatures. ANBU units were being mobilized. But more concerningly, 3 scattered signatures were moving rapidly, directly toward his location. His expression hardened. He reached for his bandana, tying it securely around his head as his stance shifted. His grief, still raw and lingering, was momentarily set aside. His instincts, honed through relentless training, demanded focus. If these were enemies, he would not allow them near one of the last remaining Uzumaki sites. His resolve solidified. He locked onto the 3 approaching presences, his muscles tensing in preparation. Then, in the span of a breath, he vanished, dissolving into a swirling mass of ravens and black feathers, slipping into the night like a phantom. With the 3 unknown signatures, Mizuki and his 2 accomplices took a moment to catch their breath, the dense forest around them silent, except for the rustling of leaves in the night breeze. The scroll of seals lay at their feet, its weight both literal and symbolic. They had succeeded in their theft, and now the real escape began. One of the Chunin grinned. "That plan of yours worked like a charm, Mizuki." Mizuki smirked, confidence exuding from him as he ran a hand over the large shuriken strapped to his back, checking for any damage from their earlier encounters. "Of course, our lord considered every possibility," he replied, his voice filled with unwavering belief in the unseen mastermind they served. Before the 3rd man could respond, an arrow sliced through the air. Silent, deadly. It struck the Chunin in the center of his chest. He gasped, stumbling back, his hands grasping at the arrow as if he could undo the inevitable. His mouth opened, but no sound escaped, just a shallow, choking exhale. Then his body hit the ground, unmoving, his unseeing eyes staring up at the darkened sky. Mizuki and his remaining allies spun around instantly, bodies tensed, eyes scanning the treetops. The 2nd arrow came just as swiftly, but this time they were alert enough to hear the faint whisper of wind that preceded its arrival. They leaped to the side, dodging, almost. Mizuki's partner was too slow. The arrow embedded itself deep into his side, but the real danger was revealed a second later. At the end of the shaft, a sizzling paper bomb burned brightly before detonating in a controlled explosion. The force of the blast sent the man hurtling backward, his body crumpling as a strangled cry tore from his throat. Mizuki's pulse spiked. This wasn't a battle. This was a hunt, and they were the prey. Without hesitation, he grabbed the scroll of seals and took off at full speed. Staying still was a death sentence. Whoever this shooter was, they were methodical, ruthless, and Mizuki was not about to wait around to become the next target. High above, a figure emerged from the dense foliage of a tree, his wooden camouflage melting away like mist. Naruto Uzumaki. His sharp blue eyes gleamed under the moonlight, a bow still in hand, though now lowered. With a single silent command, he left a shadow clone behind to tend to the injured man. Interrogation would be useful before he turned his attention to Mizuki. This wasn't a chase. This was a stalk. Moving swiftly, Naruto fired well-placed arrows, subtly directing Mizuki toward a clearing, one just outside the temple's protective barrier. Mizuki crashed into the open space, panting, his hands tightening around the scroll. His instinct screamed that something was wrong. The shadows were too still. The air fell off. His sharp gaze swept his surroundings. He noticed a faint distortion, a a shimmer in the air around him. A Jinjutsu? His fingers flew into a ram seal, disrupting his chakra flow to dispel it. Nothing changed. His breath hitched. Not a Jinjutsu. A barrier, he whispered. A sound behind him made him spin, his reflexes honed by desperation. Without thinking, he threw one of his giant shuriken at the source. A figure landed in front of him in the dark clearing, clad entirely in black, headband absent, yet undeniably trained. The boy dodged the incoming weapon effortlessly, not even bothering to block. The motion was too smooth, too confident. Mizuki sneered, trying to regain control of the situation. "You look like you came straight from a funeral," he taunted. "Good thinking. I can arrange for yours." His opponent's only response was a shift in stance. With a flick of his wrist, Naruto dismissed his bow. In its place, twin karambits gleamed under the moonlight, curved, wickedly sharp. His eyes flickered to the scroll in Mizuki's grip. "A traitor, then?" "You should really keep those words to yourself," Naruto remarked, his voice cool, even amused. Before Mizuki could retort, Naruto was already upon him. Mizuki barely dodged the first strike, only to feel the second blade slice through the fabric of his uniform, grazing his ribs. He grit his teeth and retaliated, flicking a kunai into his grip to block. The clash of metal against metal rang through the clearing, sparks flying with every impact. Mizuki struggled. His opponent's movements were fluid, relentless, each attack blending seamlessly into the next. The whirling motion of the karambits unlike anything Mizuki had ever fought against. His mind flashed to a familiar style, Asuma Saratobi. But this was different. Asuma's taijutsu resembled a boxer, direct and punishing. This boy, this phantom in the dark, moved like a shadow, his unpredictable strikes forcing Mizuki onto the defensive. Then, in a blur, Naruto created a sealless shadow clone. The fight ended even quicker. When they separated again, Mizuki was panting, his uniform shredded, his arms covered in thin, precise cuts, none fatal, but each a reminder of how badly outmatched he was. Naruto, meanwhile, stood unscathed, save for the slightly ruffled strands of blonde hair beneath his bandana. "You should take me seriously," he said with a smirk, twirling one of his karambits. "Next time, you might lose your head." Mizuki barely heard him. His gaze snapped toward a second Naruto, one standing a few feet away with a scroll of seals in hand. "No." Before Mizuki could react, both Naruto and the scroll vanished in a shunshin. Panic set in. He had lost the package. If he returned to his new lord empty-handed, he was as good as dead. There was only one option left. With desperation, Mizuki activated the cursed seal he had been given. His body twisted and morphed, flesh stretching grotesquely as he transformed into a monstrous abomination. Naruto exhaled through his nose, unfazed as the first wave of memories from his interrogation clone filtered into his mind. His blue eyes flickered as he took in the grotesque, new form before him. The seal. The change in chakra. "So you work for that snake," he muttered. "I see it clearly now." But Mizuki wasn't listening. With a wild snarl, he charged forward, muscles bulging unnaturally, driven by brute strength and rage. Naruto didn't flinch. At the last second, he leaped high over Mizuki's lunge, landing gracefully behind him as golden chains burst from the ground, wrapping around Mizuki's legs and yanking them out from under him. The traitor crashed face first into the dirt. Naruto's chakra chains tightened, coiling around Mizuki's limbs, immobilizing him as he struggled in vain. "Don't bother," Naruto said, his voice calm. "Those chains can hold back a Biju. You're not getting out." Mizuki thrashed, but the harder he fought, the tighter the chains constricted. One slithered around his neck, squeezing. His grotesque form shuddered, his movements slowing. His eyes rolled back as consciousness faded. Naruto watched, expression blank, until the transformation reversed, leaving behind only a broken, unconscious man. His clones worked swiftly. One finished copying the scroll of seals, another sketched details of the cursed seal. The original, of course, would be returned. Call it mission pay. As he stretched his senses outward, he detected ANBU closing in. Raitaro would arrive with them soon. By the time the 6 masked figures landed, the scene was already set. 3 traitors subdued, the scroll recovered, and Naruto calmly finishing a meat skewer. "You're late to the party," Naruto remarked to his wolf, offering a smirk before turning to the ANBU captain. "I believe you were looking for these guys." Hokage Tower. Office of the Hokage, shortly after. The seals in the Hokage's office flared to life the moment Hiruzen saw exactly who had recovered the scroll of seals. He exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples as he sat back in his chair. "I should have known," he muttered, though there was no real disappointment in his tone. "When Kat informed me that the traitors were found in the forest near the temple, I should have immediately considered that you were responsible. Well done." Again. He leaned forward, tapping his fingers on his desk thoughtfully. "I'd say this qualifies as a B-rank mission." Naruto exchanged a brief look with Raitaro, and with a single nod, they silently accepted the classification. Hiruzen, already moving to the next step, turned toward Raven, the ANBU who had accompanied Naruto. "Give me Dragon." With a blur of movement, Raven disappeared. Mere seconds later, she reappeared with another ANBU by her side, one clad in dark armor, a dragon mask concealing his face. Hiruzen gave a brief nod of acknowledgement to both kneeling ANBU, silently dismissing the formality and allowing them to rise. His focus shifted to Dragon. "Good to have you here," he said. Then he hesitated. His gaze flickered back to Naruto, and with a subtle shift of his fingers, he used the coded hand signs they had developed over the years. "Are we alone?" Naruto didn't answer with words. Instead, he closed his eyes and opened his senses, activating the mind's eye of the Kagura. The world around him shifted, chakra signatures flaring to life in his perception. He let his awareness expand outward, sweeping through the office, through the walls, through the corridors beyond. Then he found it. A single foreign presence, hidden but not well enough. A watcher, a spy. His eyes snapped open. With a sharp, practiced movement, he subtly signaled the exact location to Hiruzen. The response was instantaneous. The third Hokage moved faster than sight, his hand flashing as a kunai found its mark, embedding deep into the skull of the hidden observer. The spy crumpled, lifeless, before they had even fully registered their fate. Dragon had already begun drawing his sword, reacting to the sudden violence, but Hiruzen stopped him with a curt gesture. The tension in the room settled only slightly. "We will deal with this soon," Hiruzen said evenly, his voice unwavering. Then he turned back to Naruto, his demeanor shifting. With the knowledge that they were now truly alone, his voice took on a ceremonial weight, an authority that filled the space. "Uzumaki Naruto," he began, his words deliberate, "I hereby promote you to the rank of Chunin, with an automatic promotion to Tokubetsu Jonin after 1 year of active service to the village." He let the words settle before continuing. "I also call you into my service as ANBU of Konohagakure. Do you accept?" Naruto remained still, his expression unreadable. The day had taken unexpected turns, but if fate had decided to test him, then so be it. Slowly, he turned his gaze toward Raitaro. There were no words exchanged between them. There never needed to be. The wolf, after a brief pause, turned his golden eyes toward the Hokage. Then, to the shock of everyone present, he spoke. "Oh, we sure do accept, Sarutobi-sama." His deep, rumbling growl reverberated through the room, and then he bowed, exposing his neck in a display of trust and acknowledgement. Silence filled the office. Even Dragon, known for his unwavering composure, stiffened slightly, his fingers flexing in surprise. Hiruzen, however, merely smiled, a knowing, satisfied smile. Then it's decided. Hokage residence, directly after Raitaro accepted for the both of them. Eh, Naruto exclaimed, eyes wide in shock. You can talk. Raitaro grinned at him. Sure can. You can thank that Inuzuka wolfhound for that. Kuramaru explained how it works, and now here I am, talking. Well, that is certainly unexpected, Hiruzen added, his voice calm but tinged with intrigue. A chuckle rippled through the room, even the ever-composed dragon letting out a quiet laugh. The Sandame turned his gaze toward Raven. You reported to Dragon about our discussion today, correct? Raven gave a short nod, but it was Dragon who answered. Yes, Hokage-sama. I'm looking forward to our newest recruit. If he's as talented as you say, he could be a valuable asset in the future. Hiruzen nodded in agreement. Exactly. Raven, you will take. His gaze shifted between Naruto and Raitaro, eyes lingering on the latter for a moment before he continued. You take Wolf and get him properly outfitted. Tomorrow, after I finish handling the academy promotions, I want all three of you back here. I have an idea that could prove beneficial moving forward. A synchronized chorus of "Hi" echoed in response before they were formally dismissed. However, before leaving, Naruto was handed his B rank mission payment. Raven informed him that she would pick him up in the morning to take him to the ANBU quarters and advised him to pack his things. With that, she vanished into the night, leaving him to his own devices. Wasting no time, Naruto hurried home. He took a quick shower, washing away the grime of the day, before kneeling at the memorial to offer his prayers. Beside him, Raitaro sat silently, as if paying respects in his own way. The next morning, they rose early, moving through their routine with practiced efficiency. Together, they secured the temple, locking it down with an intricate web of space-time seals. The enhancements ensured that the entire structure was now partially displaced from reality, making it undetectable to even the most skilled sensorine. With everything in order, they prepared for what lay ahead. Hokage office noon. Not only had Naruto and Raven gathered in the Hokage's round office, but two others were also present. The ANBU dragon and a masked operative with an owl-themed mask. Naruto and Raitaro gave the Hokage a respectful nod, which he acknowledged with a glance before activating a series of intricate seals, locking the office down completely. Wonderful. Everyone's on time, Hiruzen remarked. His statement drew a brief chuckle from Owl before the masked ANBU quickly composed himself. If Dragon noticed, he gave no indication. The Hokage allowed himself a small smile as he took in the assembled group. The reason I called you here is quite simple, he continued, his tone carrying the weight of his authority. After yesterday's incident, I'll need to conduct a thorough review of a significant portion of the ANBU. Dragon and I will have our hands full. However, we must still ensure that potential threats to Konoha are eliminated. He paused, standing up and slowly crossing the room, hands clasped behind his back. Fortunately, our spy master has found a trustworthy source to assist with this task. Additionally, despite Wolf here being only a recruit, he and his partner, Raitaro, are among our most skilled trackers, second only to the Inuzuka. That statement finally provoked a reaction. Owl and Dragon both turned their attention toward Naruto, assessing him. He stood at ease, clad in full ANBU uniform, the standard-issue sword strapped to his back, giving nothing away beneath his mask. Hiruzen, however, was not finished. You three, Raven, Owl, and Wolf, will form a new, highly specialized unit. You will be the foundation of the next generation of Konoha's Hunter-nin. Dragon let out a thoughtful hum, but remained silent. Raven gave a single nod, accepting the assignment without question. Owl, on the other hand, glanced at Naruto, eyes scrutinizing the youngest among them. While Naruto had grown and was catching up to Raven's height, he was still slightly shorter, a fact that did not go unnoticed. Hiruzen observed Owl's demeanor and addressed him directly. You have a comment, Owl? Being called out so directly by the Hokage was unexpected, but the operative straightened his stance immediately. I'm not sure about this, Hokage-sama, he stated neutrally. He doesn't look like much. Behind his mask, Naruto rolled his eyes, though outwardly he remained composed. He had already closed his eyes for a moment, reaching out with his senses, so close now he could feel everything about the man before him. Judging a book by its cover isn't always wise, Naruto replied, his voice as calm as the ANBU's own. Just because you can throw a few logs around doesn't mean you should assume you know everything. Raitaro, lounging lazily in the office, let out a smug chuckle. You'd live a lot longer if you learned that lesson sooner rather than later. The Hokage chuckled as well. Amused by the flicker of bewilderment he could sense beneath Owl's mask. Owl asked, skepticism creeping into his tone. That's classified information, Raitaro answered, grinning. Naruto shook his head. And yet, I somehow have access to it, he said, amusement lacing his words. So maybe, before making bold statements, you should consider whether your intel is complete. Because right now it isn't. Enough, Hiruzen interjected before the tension could escalate further. I created this team because your skills complement each other perfectly. Dragon will be your contact for missions, but before we proceed, there's still some team building to be done. He turned slightly, addressing Dragon directly. Old friend, you're welcome to observe if you wish. With that, the meeting came to an end. In the blink of an eye, the office emptied as 6 bodies vanished in synchronized shunshins, leaving behind only a scattering of leaves. Hidden Hokage training ground. Hiruzen placed his hand on the blood seal, channeling chakra into it. The lock disengaged with a faint glow, granting them access to one of Konoha's most secure training grounds. Typically, this space was reserved for the Hokage's private training, an area safeguarded against prying enemy eyes. Today, however, it served a different purpose. All except Dragon, unmask, Hiruzen ordered. Naruto complied, pulling off his mask to reveal a hint of blonde hair beneath the black bandana he wore, now adorned with an orange Uzumaki swirl. Izumi hesitated for a moment before following suit, her dark hair tumbling free as her mask came off. Yamato, the last to do so, removed his own with a measured movement. Hiruzen looked at the 3 before nodding. I trust all of you. Izumi Uchiha, Yamato, meet Uzumaki Naruto, son of Kushina Uzumaki and Minato Namikaze. Also, the current Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Kitsune. The reaction was immediate. Yamato and Izumi both took a step back, processing the revelation. For Izumi, it was merely new information, albeit surprising. But the son of a yondaime? That was unexpected. Naruto waved casually, his fingers ruffling the fur of his wolf-like companion. Yo, and this here is Raitaro, best nose in the world and my hunting buddy. Raitaro simply lifted a paw in acknowledgement, but said nothing, his sharp eyes scanning the 2 ANBU operatives. Hiruzen allowed the silence to settle before adding, Naruto has already completed 7 C-rank missions and a B rank on his own. That B rank mission, I might add, prevented a significant embarrassment for the village. However, I believe a short spar will clarify some things. He turned toward Naruto with a questioning brow. Naruto held a brief mental conversation with Kurama. Both were in agreement. This was a good opportunity to demonstrate his abilities, particularly his wood release, and more importantly, to dispel any lingering concerns about Kurama being a threat. Looking back at Hiruzen, Naruto gave a subtle nod before exchanging a glance with Raitaro. A smirk tugged at the corners of their lips, an expression that made Izumi feel vaguely uneasy. Rules of engagement, Gigi? Naruto asked. Sarutobi chuckled. No maiming or killing. Everything else is fair game. Even before the Hokage could elaborate further, Naruto's hands were already forming seals, tiger, ram, snake. Slamming his foot into the ground, he called out, Mokutan Hijitsu, Jukai Koten. To say the reaction was shock would be an understatement. Hiruzen and Dragon instinctively leaped away as massive trees burst from the ground, their thick roots twisting and surging upward at a rapid pace. Yamato stumbled, barely catching himself as he stared in utter disbelief. He had attempted that very technique before, but had only managed a much smaller version. Within seconds, the entire training field had transformed into a dense forest, cloaked in shadow. And just like that, Naruto and Raitaro had vanished. The two remaining ANBU exchanged glances before Izumi activated her Sharingan, her crimson eyes scanning the environment. Maybe now's the time to start taking him seriously, Tenzo, she said flatly. Yamato didn't get a chance to respond before he noticed the faintest distortion in the leaves. Izumi twisted sharply to the side, just as an arrow embedded itself deep into the earth where she had been standing. Well, Yamato muttered before both operatives flickered into movement, disappearing into the trees. Meanwhile, Dragon turned toward Hiruzen. Did you know this was going to happen, Hokage-sama? Hiruzen unsealed his pipe and took a slow puff, his expression unreadable but amused. Perhaps. I may have noticed a certain section of the Scroll of Seals being unsealed recently. Of course, it was resealed right after, but I had my suspicions after a report from Raven. Dragon simply nodded, silently processing the information. His eyes scanned the shifting shadows in the trees, but despite his experience, he saw no sign of the two recruits. I can't even sense him, Dragon admitted. Normally, a sensor can recognize another sensor with ease. Hiruzen exhaled a cloud of smoke and chuckled. Well, not this time, huh? His tone was one of easy banter that, more often than not, Dragon found himself losing. Deep within the newly formed forest, Naruto had erected a quick barrier, shielding himself and Raitaro as they formulated strategy. Izumi knows me too well, Naruto murmured. She'll be my biggest problem. You take her. They're probably expecting us to fight like an Inuzuka pair, Raitaro added, his sharp canines flashing in a grin. But we're better than that. Naruto nodded, reaching into his storage seals. You still good with handling Jinjutsu? Raitaro scoffed. I'm better at flushing it from my system than you are. Besides, I have an idea. You got any water stored? Naruto unsealed a scroll and handed it off to a shadow clone that appeared beside him. You know what to do. The clone gave a sharp nod before vanishing. Naruto turned to Raitaro, eyes gleaming beneath his mask. Let's hunt us some ANBU. With a flicker of movement, the two disappeared into the trees. Izumi and Yamato remained close, instinctively understanding the danger of splitting up. A sudden, creeping mist began rolling through the training ground, thickening by the second. First wood release, now water release? Yamato muttered. I know that technique exists in the archives, but what else does he have? Izumi's lips quirked into a slight smile as she glanced at her comrade. More than you've accounted for, apparently. And honestly, I'm proud of him.